Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Marcus Bright had built his life like a fortress, methodical, calculated, and seemingly impenetrable. At 42, he commanded respect in the private security consulting world, his company providing protection for high-profile clients across the country. His steel-gray eyes had seen combat in Afghanistan, corporate espionage, and the darkest corners of human nature. Yet nothing had prepared him for the betrayal brewing in his own home. The Bright residence sat on 5 acres of manicured Texas landscape, complete with a swimming pool that reflected the setting sun like liquid gold. Marcus pulled his black Range Rover into the circular driveway, noting Derek McMahon's silver BMW already parked near the front entrance. Derek had become a frequent visitor over the past 3 months, introduced by Cheryl as a business associate from her interior design firm. "Daddy," Emma Adams Bright called from the front steps. At 16, she had inherited her late mother's sharp intelligence, but Marcus's unwavering loyalty. He had adopted her when she was 8 after her biological mother, his first wife, died in a car accident. Emma was the one pure thing in his increasingly complicated world. "How's my girl?" Marcus embraced her, inhaling the familiar scent of her vanilla perfume. "Derek's here again," Emma whispered, her voice carrying a tension that made Marcus's military instincts sharpen. "He's been asking me weird questions about you, about your work." Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "What kind of questions?" "Like whether you keep work files at home, if you travel with security details, stuff like that." Emma pulled back, her green eyes, so much like her biological mother's, filled with concern. "I don't trust him, Dad." Before Marcus could respond, Cheryl Kingbright appeared in the doorway. Even after 7 years of marriage, she still took his breath away. Her auburn hair caught the porch light, and her designer dress hugged curves that had graced magazine covers during her brief modeling career. But lately, something had changed in her hazel eyes, a distance that spoke of secrets. "Marcus, honey, you're home early," Cheryl said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Derek and I were just discussing the Henderson project." Derek McMahon emerged behind her, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway. At 35, he possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that made him popular with wealthy clients seeking both interior design and, apparently, other services. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his expensive watch catching the light as he extended his hand. "Marcus, good to see you again," Derek said, his grip firm but lasting a fraction too long. "Cheryl's been telling me about your fascinating work. Private security must be incredibly demanding." "It has its moments," Marcus replied, his voice neutral. He had learned long ago to reveal nothing until he understood the battlefield completely. That evening, over dinner at the mahogany table that had belonged to Marcus's grandfather, the conversation flowed with practiced ease. Derek regaled them with stories from his latest projects, a tech mobile's penthouse, a senator's countryside estate. He was charming, attentive, and utterly convincing in his role as the family friend. But Marcus noticed the subtle touches, Derek's hand brushing Cheryl's when passing the salt, the way her laugh carried a breathless quality it had lost with Marcus years ago, the meaningful glances they shared when they thought he wasn't looking. After Derek left, Marcus retreated to his study while Cheryl and Emma cleaned up. The room was his sanctuary, lined with military commendations, photos from his security consulting days, and a gun safe that held more than just firearms. He poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and activated the secure laptop that connected him to his network of contacts worldwide. Owen Ward answered on the second ring. "Marcus, what's the situation?" Owen had served under Marcus in the Rangers, his specialty being long-range reconnaissance and elimination. After discharge, he had transitioned into freelance work, the kind that didn't appear on tax returns. His loyalty to Marcus was absolute, forged in the mountains of Afghanistan where Marcus had pulled him from a burning Humvee. "I need surveillance on a target," Marcus said, sending Derek's photo and details through their encrypted channel. "Full background, financial records, communication intercepts." I want to know what brand of toothpaste he uses. How deep do you want me to go? Marcus took a long sip of bourbon, feeling its burn match the cold fire growing in his chest. All the way to the bottom, Owen. This one's personal. After ending the call, Marcus sat in the darkness, his mind already working through possibilities. In his world, information was power, and power was survival. If Derek McMahon thought he could walk into Marcus Bright's life and take what belonged to him, he was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating a man who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of controlled violence. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight as Marcus began planning what would become the most important operation of his life. Chapter 2. The Discovery. 3 days later, Owen's report arrived via encrypted email, and Marcus felt the foundation of his world crack like thin ice. Derek McMahon wasn't just sleeping with his wife. He was a professional con artist with a specialty in wealthy, lonely spouses. His real name was Derek McMahon, and he had left a trail of broken marriages and emptied bank accounts across 4 states. Marcus sat in his downtown office, the Dallas skyline glittering beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. The report detailed Derek's methods: identify the target, study their weaknesses, infiltrate their social circle, seduce the spouse, gather financial information, then disappear with everything he could liquidate. The timeline was typically 6 months. Derek had been working Cheryl for 3, but there was more. The surveillance footage Owen had gathered showed Derek and Cheryl at the Adolphus Hotel, their passion evident even through the grainy telephoto images. In one particularly damning video, Cheryl was laughing as she showed Derek documents Marcus recognized as his own financial records. The betrayal cut deeper than any shrapnel he had taken in Afghanistan. But unlike those battlefield wounds, this one demanded a different kind of surgery. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, can we talk? It's about Mom and Derek." He drove home through afternoon traffic, his mind cold and calculating. The house felt different now, tainted by deception and greed. He found Emma in the pool house, her usual after-school refuge where she did homework and practiced guitar. "I saw them together," Emma said without preamble, her young face aged by knowledge no teenager should carry. "Yesterday, when they thought I was at soccer practice. They were in your bedroom, Dad." Marcus sat beside her on the wicker couch, his large hands gentle as he took hers. "How long have you known?" "About a month. I wanted to tell you, but I wasn't sure how." Tears gathered in her green eyes. "She's not who I thought she was. Neither of them are." "No, sweetheart, they're not." Marcus's voice carried a deadly calm that Emma had heard only once before, the day he had confronted the drunk driver who had nearly hit her school bus. "But here's what we're going to do about it." That evening, Marcus called a family meeting. They gathered in the living room, Cheryl curled on the leather sofa in yoga pants and a cashmere sweater that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. Derek had been invited, another business discussion that was becoming increasingly frequent. "I've been thinking about our future," Marcus began, his voice warm and conversational. "My work has been demanding lately, and I realize I haven't been the husband and father I should be." Cheryl's face showed surprise, while Derek's expression remained carefully neutral. Emma, seated across from them, played her part perfectly, the concerned daughter worried about her parents' marriage. "I want to make some changes," Marcus continued, "starting with a family vacation. I've been looking at properties in Costa Rica, beach houses, complete privacy, a chance for us to reconnect." "That sounds wonderful," Cheryl said, her voice carrying genuine warmth for the first time in months. "When were you thinking?" "Next month. I've already spoken with a realtor about a property in Manuel Antonio. Private beach, fully staffed, the works." Marcus smiled, but Emma caught the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Derek, you should join us. Consider it a working vacation. Cheryl mentioned you might be interested in expanding into international markets." Derek leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "That's incredibly generous. Marcus, are you sure?" "Absolutely. Family friends are important." Marcus's smile never wavered. "Besides, it would give us a chance to get to know each other better. I feel like we've been dancing around a real friendship." After Derek left that night, Marcus and Emma sat on the back patio, while Cheryl took her usual evening bath. The pool lights cast rippling reflections on the water, and Marcus found himself studying the depth markers along the sides. "You have a plan," Emma said. It wasn't a question. "I have the beginning of one." Marcus looked at his daughter, this brave young woman who had chosen his side without hesitation. "But it's going to require both of us to be very convincing actors for the next few weeks." "What do you need me to do?" Marcus outlined the basics, continued normalcy, gathering information, and most importantly, making Derek believe he was winning. Emma listened with the focused attention she had inherited from her adoptive father, asking strategic questions that reminded Marcus why he was so proud of her. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as they prepared to go inside. "I need you to understand that after this is over, nothing will be the same. Your relationship with Cheryl will end permanently. Are you prepared for that?" Emma stared at the pool for a long moment, then met his eyes with a resolve that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "She stopped being my mom the day she chose him over our family. I'm with you, Dad, whatever it takes." That night, Marcus lay awake beside his sleeping wife, listening to her breath and memorizing the sound. Soon, she would understand the difference between Marcus Bright, the loving husband, and Marcus Bright, the man who had survived 3 tours in hell by never showing mercy to his enemies. The grandfather clock chimed 3 a.m. as Marcus began refining the details of Derek McMahon's destruction. Chapter 3. The Recruitment. 2 weeks into the charade, Marcus had assembled his team. The Costa Rica vacation was a convenient cover for bringing together the specialists he would need for what he had begun thinking of as Operation Clean House. Owen Ward arrived first, his military bearing evident despite his casual clothes. He had been conducting surveillance from a rented apartment across from Derek's place, documenting every move, every visitor, every weakness. His preliminary report was thorough. Derek was overconfident, had no military training, and relied entirely on charm and manipulation rather than physical prowess. "He's soft," Owen reported as they sat in Marcus's study. "Never been in a real fight, probably never even held a gun. This won't be difficult from a tactical standpoint." "It's not about difficulty," Marcus replied, studying Derek's profile photos. "It's about sending a message that reaches beyond just him." The second recruit was Calvin Bond, a former Navy SEAL who now ran a private investigation firm specializing in corporate espionage. Calvin had the unique skill of making people disappear, not permanently, but thoroughly enough that they ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Bank accounts, credit reports, social security numbers, employment records. Calvin could erase a person's entire digital footprint with surgical precision. "Your wife's boyfriend has been sloppy," Calvin reported during their meeting at an upscale downtown restaurant. "He's got accounts under 3 different names, but all traceable once you know the patterns. Give me the word, and Derek McMahon becomes a ghost." The third member was unexpected. Jeremiah Jacobs, Cheryl's own divorce attorney. Marcus had approached him not for legal advice, but for strategic intelligence. Jeremiah was ambitious, expensive, and utterly without loyalty to any client who couldn't continue paying his fees. "She's been asking hypothetical questions about asset division," Jeremiah revealed over drinks at his private club. "Specifically, what would happen to your business holdings in a divorce, and whether your military pension could be touched." "How hypothetical?" Marcus asked. "She scheduled a formal consultation for next week, under a false name, but my secretary recognized her from the society pages." Jeremiah's smile was predatory. "For the right consideration, I could provide you with advance notice of her strategy." Marcus paid Jeremiah's retainer that night, ensuring that every move Cheryl made would be reported back to him within hours. But the most crucial recruitment happened at home, with Emma continuing to play the role of the naive daughter while gathering intelligence that professional operatives couldn't access. She had befriended Derek, playing up her supposed admiration for his sophistication and worldliness. In return, Derek had begun treating her like a confidant, sharing details about his relationship with Cheryl that revealed the depth of their planning. "He thinks you're some kind of government contractor," Emma reported during one of their evening strategy sessions. "Cheryl told him about your overseas clients and the cash payments. They're planning to clean out your accounts and disappear to Monaco." Timeline. He wants to move faster, but Cheryl is insisting on waiting until after your Costa Rica trip. She thinks you'll be more relaxed and trusting afterward. Emma's voice carried disgust. She actually said it would be easier to finish things once you're emotionally invested in fixing the marriage. Marcus felt something cold and final settle in his chest. He had given Cheryl 7 years of his life, his protection, his name, and his complete trust. She had responded by calculating the most efficient way to destroy him. That weekend, Marcus hosted a barbecue, ostensibly to celebrate Derek's birthday. The guest list was carefully chosen. Owen and Calvin, introduced as old military friends, Jeremiah and his wife, presented as longtime family friends, and several of Marcus's legitimate business associates, providing cover for the operational discussions happening in plain sight. Derek basked in the attention, playing the role of Cheryl's successful boyfriend while charming the wives and impressing the men with his knowledge of fine wines and luxury travel. He was good at his job, Marcus admitted, probably the most convincing sociopath he had encountered outside of a war zone. But Derek made one crucial mistake. He underestimated Emma. During the party, as adults mingled around the pool and bar, Derek approached Emma where she sat on the diving board, her feet dangling in the water. "You know, Emma, you're really mature for your age," Derek said, his voice carrying a tone that made Emma's skin crawl. "Most kids your age wouldn't understand the complexity of adult relationships." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her voice carefully innocent. "Well, sometimes people fall out of love, and new love has to make room for itself. Your father's a good man, but he's not the right man for your mother anymore." Derek sat beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. When that happens, sometimes changes have to be made for everyone's happiness. Emma looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Are you saying you and Mom are going to get married?" "Maybe someday, sweetheart. But that would mean some difficult adjustments for everyone." Derek's hand squeezed gently. "I want us to be a family, you know? A real family. Would you like that?" "I think so," Emma said, then added with calculated innocence. "Would we keep living here? In Dad's house?" Derek's smile was answer enough. That night, after the last guest had left and the pool lights reflected off empty beer bottles and discarded paper plates, Marcus and Emma sat in his study reviewing the evening's intelligence. Emma's account of Derek's conversation was the final piece Marcus needed, proof that Derek wasn't just planning to steal his wife and money, but to replace him entirely. "He's not just a con man," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "He's a predator who thinks he can take my life, my home, and my daughter." Emma met his eyes with steady resolve. "So what do we do now?" Marcus opened his laptop and began typing a message to Owen Ward. The subject line read, "Operation Clean House, Phase 2 authorized." "Now, sweetheart," Marcus said as he hit send, "we teach Derek McMahon what happens when someone tries to destroy the wrong family." The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking the end of Derek's last peaceful night on Earth. Chapter 4. The Setup. The Costa Rica vacation planning provided perfect cover for Marcus's real preparations. While Cheryl and Derek pored over travel brochures and discussed restaurants in Manuel Antonio, Marcus was coordinating with Owen to transform their Texas property into a carefully orchestrated trap. "The pool area is ideal," Owen reported during their secure video call. He was speaking from a hotel room in Austin, where he was supposedly attending a veterans conference. Clear sight lines from multiple positions, controlled access points, and the acoustics will work in our favor. Marcus studied the tactical photographs Owen had taken of their backyard. "What about civilians? The neighbors?" "The Hendersons are in Europe for another month, and the Kowalskis never use their back patio after dark. We'll have complete operational security." Owen's face was serious on the screen. "Are you certain about the timeline? Once we initiate, there's no pulling back." "I'm certain," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded soldiers in combat. Derek has accelerated his own schedule. Jeremiah says Cheryl is meeting with him tomorrow to finalize divorce papers. She's planning to serve me the day we return from Costa Rica. The next evening, Marcus played his role perfectly. He arrived home with flowers, white roses, Cheryl's favorites, and a bottle of champagne to celebrate their upcoming trip. Derek was there, as he increasingly was, helping Cheryl pack and offering suggestions about beachside dining. "This is going to be perfect," Cheryl said, her eyes bright with what Marcus now recognized as greed rather than love. "Just what our marriage needs." Derek raised his wine glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his smile carrying the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Marcus clinked his glass against Derek's, maintaining eye contact. "To getting exactly what we deserve," he replied. Emma, sitting nearby with her homework, looked up and caught her father's eye. The silent communication between them was brief but complete. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Over the following days, Marcus made a show of tying up business loose ends before their departure. He met with clients, cleared his schedule, and made arrangements for his company to operate in his absence. But his real activities were far more focused. Calvin Bond provided the technical infrastructure, installing nearly invisible surveillance equipment throughout the house and grounds. The cameras were military-grade, designed for hostile environments, and completely undetectable to civilians. More importantly, they would provide undeniable documentation of everything that was about to unfold. "The audio pickup is crystal clear," Calvin demonstrated from his laptop. "Every conversation, every whisper, every breath will be recorded. When this is over, you'll have enough evidence to justify anything that happens." Marcus also made one final recruitment. Tim Owen, a local businessman who ran a small aircraft charter service. Tim was an old friend from Marcus's early days in Texas, and more importantly, he was someone who understood the value of discretion and asking no questions. "I need a flight plan filed for Costa Rica, scheduled for next Thursday," Marcus told Tim over lunch at their usual downtown restaurant. "But I also need the flexibility to change destinations without notice." "No problem," Tim replied, his weathered face asking no questions. "Private strips in Mexico, Caribbean, wherever you need to go. Cash basis, no records." That evening, Marcus made his final preparations in the study. He cleaned and loaded his service pistol, a Sig Sauer P226 that had been his companion through 3 combat deployments. He updated his will, leaving everything to Emma with specific instructions for his business partners. Most importantly, he recorded a video message explaining his actions, to be released only if the operation went catastrophically wrong. "If you're watching this," Marcus said to the camera, "then Derek McMahon and Cheryl Kingbright succeeded in destroying my life. The evidence you'll find in this room will explain why I had no choice but to respond with extreme prejudice." Friday night, 3 days before their scheduled departure, Derek made his final mistake. He arrived at the house earlier than usual, around 6 p.m., carrying an expensive bottle of wine and wearing the confident smile of a man about to close a business deal. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind," Derek said as they gathered in the living room, "but I've been thinking about our Costa Rica trip, and I have a proposition." Marcus settled into his leather chair, accepting the wine with apparent pleasure. "I'm listening." "Well, Cheryl and I have been discussing the future, your future specifically. We think you work too hard, carry too much stress." Derek's voice carried practiced sympathy. "What if this vacation becomes something more? What if you find a way to step back from the day-to-day pressures and enjoy life?" Emma looked up from her phone with perfectly feigned curiosity. "What do you mean?" Derek exchanged a meaningful look with Cheryl before continuing. "I know some people in Costa Rica, investors, business owners. They're always looking for partners with Marcus's expertise. With the right connections, you could establish a security consulting firm down there, work when you want to live in paradise." "That sounds amazing," Marcus said, his voice warm with false interest. "But what about my business here? My clients, my obligations?" "That's the beauty of it," Cheryl interjected, her voice carrying an excitement that made Marcus's blood run cold. "You could liquidate your current holdings, use the capital to start fresh. Clean slate, new life, no stress." Marcus pretended to consider this, sipping his wine thoughtfully. In reality, he was memorizing every word, every gesture, every tell that revealed their true intentions. They weren't just planning to steal his money. They were planning to isolate him in a foreign country, away from his resources and contacts, where he would be completely vulnerable. It's an intriguing idea, Marcus finally said. Let me think about it over the weekend. We can discuss details once we're down there, see how the place feels. Derek's smile was triumphant. That's all we ask. Just keep an open mind. That night, after Derek left and Cheryl retired to her bath with another glass of wine, Marcus and Emma sat by the pool. The underwater lights cast eerie shadows on the bottom, and Marcus found himself studying the deep end where the pool reached 12 feet. "They're planning to kill you," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying absolute certainty. Marcus nodded slowly. "In Costa Rica, somewhere remote, probably made to look like an accident. Derek gets the grieving widow, plus whatever life insurance he can access. But they don't know that you know." "No, they don't." Marcus looked at his daughter, this remarkable young woman who had chosen to stand with him against the world. "Are you ready for this, sweetheart? Once it begins, there's no going back for any of us." Emma met his eyes with steady resolve. "I've been ready since the day I saw them together in your bedroom. They destroyed our family, Dad. Now they pay the price." The pool filter hummed quietly in the darkness, circulating water that would soon hold far more than chlorine and designer pool chemicals. In 48 hours, Derek McMahon would discover the difference between planning a con and surviving a war. Chapter 5. The Psychological Warfare. Sunday morning arrived gray and humid, with storm clouds gathering over Dallas like an omen. Marcus woke early, his internal clock still set to military time, and found Derek's BMW already in the driveway. The man was becoming bold in his final days, apparently confident enough to spend entire weekends in Marcus's home. In the kitchen, Marcus discovered Derek making breakfast. Eggs Benedict with hollandaise sauce, fresh fruit artfully arranged, coffee in the expensive French press that had been a wedding gift. The domesticity of it was almost insulting. "Morning, Marcus," Derek said with easy familiarity. "Hope you don't mind. I thought I'd surprise everyone with breakfast. Cheryl mentioned you love Eggs Benedict." "Thoughtful of you," Marcus replied, accepting a cup of coffee while studying Derek's movements. The man was comfortable in the space, knowing where everything was kept, moving with the confidence of someone who already considered this his home. Cheryl appeared in silk pajamas and a robe, her hair perfectly tousled in a way that had once driven Marcus wild. Now he recognized it as another performance, calculated to maintain the illusion of domestic bliss. "Isn't this nice?" she said, kissing Derek's cheek while barely acknowledging Marcus. "Like a real family." Emma entered wearing workout clothes, her expression carefully neutral. "Smells good," she said, though Marcus caught the slight tightness around her eyes that indicated she was fighting revulsion. During breakfast, Derek launched into what Marcus recognized as his closing pitch. The Costa Rica plan was expanded now. Marcus could sell his business to Calvin Bond, who was supposedly interested in expanding into private security, liquidate his assets, and move south permanently. Derek had contacts who could fast-track residency papers, investment opportunities, even a house already picked out. "The place I found is incredible," Derek said, showing photos on his phone. "Ocean view, private beach, completely isolated. You could live like a king down there, Marcus. No stress, no corporate politics, just sun and surf." Marcus studied the photos with apparent interest, noting the property's isolation and the lack of nearby neighbors or roads. It was perfect for murder. In the criminal world, Derek might have succeeded. But Derek had never faced someone who had spent years planning military operations where failure meant death. "It looks amazing," Marcus said. "When will we need to make a decision?" "Well, that's the thing," Cheryl interjected, her voice carrying practiced urgency. "The property won't stay on the market long. If we're serious, we need to move fast. Maybe extend our vacation, stay down there long enough to handle the paperwork." "Extend how long?" Emma asked, her concern sounding genuine. Derek smiled at her with paternal warmth that made Marcus's trigger finger itch. "Maybe a month or two, sweetheart. Just until everything's finalized." Marcus made a show of considering this, then nodded slowly. "You know what? Let's do it. Life's too short not to take chances." The relief and triumph on Cheryl and Derek's faces was almost comical. They exchanged a look that spoke volumes, The fish was hooked, ready to be reeled in and cleaned. That afternoon, while Derek and Cheryl went shopping for their extended vacation wardrobe, Marcus initiated the final phase of his preparations. Owen Ward arrived at the house, carrying a golf bag that contained far more than golf clubs. "Perimeter is secured," Owen reported as they walked the property. "I've got 3 positions with clear lines of sight to the pool area. Backup routes established, emergency extraction protocols in place." They stopped at the pool house, where Owen had established his primary overwatch position. From here, he had an unobstructed view of the entire backyard, while remaining invisible to anyone in the main house. "What about the girl?" Owen asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Emma knows exactly what her role is," Marcus replied. "She's stronger than people give her credit for." Owen nodded, but Marcus caught the concern in his old friend's eyes. This wasn't Afghanistan, where the rules of engagement were clear and the enemy wore different uniforms. This was personal, messy, and involved a 16-year-old girl who was about to watch her stepmother's boyfriend die violently. "Marcus," Owen said carefully, "I've been thinking about alternatives. We could just disappear him, make it look like he ran off with someone else's money. No need for—" "No." Marcus's voice carried absolute finality. "Derek McMahon chose to threaten my daughter, steal from my family, and plan my murder. He gets what that deserves." Sunday evening brought the final dinner before their departure. Derek arrived with champagne and flowers, playing the role of devoted family friend. But Marcus noticed new details: the way Derek studied the security system panel, how he measured distances between rooms, the careful attention he paid to Emma's routines. The man wasn't just planning to rob and kill Marcus in Costa Rica. He was already casing the house for additional opportunities, treating Emma like another asset to be acquired. The realization filled Marcus with a cold rage that reminded him of his worst days in combat, when the enemy had threatened civilians under his protection. After dinner, Derek made his most revealing mistake yet. As they sat by the pool with drinks, he began questioning Emma about her plans for the future: college, career, relationships. His questions were too personal, too focused, carrying an undertone that made Emma visibly uncomfortable. "You're really growing up, Emma," Derek said, his voice carrying what he probably thought was paternal warmth. "Soon you'll be off to college, starting your own life. It's exciting, but also a little scary, isn't it?" "I guess," Emma replied, moving slightly closer to Marcus on the patio couch. "The thing is, sweetheart, family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to care for each other." Derek's hand rested on the arm of his chair, fingers drumming in a pattern Marcus recognized as nervous energy. "When your father and Cheryl and I become a real family, I want you to know that I'll always be here for you. Whatever you need, whatever happens." The promise carried implications that made Marcus's vision red around the edges. Derek wasn't just planning to replace him. He was planning to groom Emma, to gradually normalize his presence in her life until she became another victim of his manipulation. "That's very kind of you," Emma said with perfect innocence, though Marcus saw her hands trembling slightly. "I'm lucky to have people who care about me." That night, after Derek finally left, Marcus found Emma in her bedroom, sitting on her bed with her knees drawn up to her chest. She looked younger than her 16 years, vulnerable in a way that reminded Marcus why he had adopted her in the first place: to protect her from a world that too often hurt innocent people. "He's going to try to hurt me too, isn't he?" Emma asked quietly. Marcus sat beside her on the bed, his large hand gentle on her shoulder. "Not while I'm alive to prevent it. And after Costa Rica, when you're supposed to be dead." Marcus met her eyes with absolute certainty. "Derek McMahon will never have the chance to hurt anyone again. I promise you that, sweetheart. On my honor as your father and as a soldier." Emma leaned against him, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I'm scared, Dad. Not of what we're going to do, but of what happens after, when it's all over and it's just us." Marcus held her close, feeling the weight of responsibility that had defined his entire adult life. "After it's over, we'll be free. Free to build whatever life we want, wherever we want to build it. But first, we have to finish this." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning illuminated the pool where Derek McMahon would soon discover that some men were far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Chapter 6. The Final Hours. Tuesday evening, their last night before the Costa Rica departure, felt charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the storm clouds gathering overhead. Derek arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, carrying his luggage and wearing the satisfied expression of a man about to close the biggest deal of his career. "I can't believe we're really doing this," Cheryl said as they gathered in the living room for a final toast. She had spent the afternoon at the spa, her skin glowing and her eyes bright with anticipation. "It feels like the start of something incredible." Derek raised his champagne glass, his smile encompassing the room like a conquering general surveying his territory. "To new adventures and the courage to seize them," he said. "And to the family that's brave enough to change everything." Marcus clinked his glass against Derek's, studying the younger man's face. Derek was handsome, charming, and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. In 12 hours, he would be dead. "To getting what we deserve," Marcus replied, echoing his toast from days earlier. Emma, dressed in her favorite sundress for the trip, raised her sparkling cider with apparent enthusiasm. But Marcus caught the slight tremor in her hand, the careful control in her voice when she spoke. His daughter was playing her role perfectly, but the strain was showing. After dinner, Derek suggested a final swim. "The pool in Costa Rica won't be as nice as this one," he said, already stripping off a shirt to reveal the gym-sculpted physique that had undoubtedly helped him seduce countless victims. "We should enjoy it while we can." Cheryl joined him in the water, their laughter echoing off the pool house walls as they splashed and played like teenagers. Marcus watched from his lounge chair, memorizing the scene. By tomorrow night, the pool would need to be drained and professionally cleaned. Emma sat beside him, her feet dangling in the shallow end. To any observer, they looked like a normal family enjoying their last evening at home. But Marcus was conducting a final tactical assessment, noting sight lines, escape routes, and the precise depth markers that would matter in a few hours. "The water's perfect, Marcus," Derek called from the deep end. "Come on in." "Maybe later," Marcus replied. "I'm enjoying watching you two have fun." Derek swam closer to where Emma sat, his movements graceful and predatory. "What about you, Emma? Want to join us for a midnight swim tomorrow after the flight? I bet Costa Rican pools are warm enough for night swimming." "That sounds nice," Emma said, though Marcus saw her inch slightly away from Derek's reaching hand. "I've never swum in the ocean at night." "We'll have to change that," Derek said, his voice carrying promises that made Marcus's blood pressure spike. "There's a lot of new experiences waiting for you down there, sweetheart." At 10 p.m., Derek and Cheryl finally emerged from the pool, their bodies gleaming with water and moonlight. They toweled off while making final plans for the morning departure. Flight at 8 a.m., arrival in San Jose by afternoon, ground transportation to Manuel Antonio arranged by Derek's mysterious contacts. "I should head home and get some sleep," Derek said, though he made no move to leave. "Long day tomorrow." "You could stay here," Cheryl suggested with the kind of casual intimacy that confirmed everything Marcus already knew. "The guest room is made up, and it would save you the drive in the morning." Derek glanced at Marcus, his expression carefully respectful. "If you don't mind, that would be convenient." "Of course not," Marcus replied with perfect composure. "Consider yourself part of the family." The irony wasn't lost on him. Derek would indeed become part of the family in the most permanent way possible. By midnight, the house was quiet. Cheryl and Derek had retired to the guest room with whispered promises and barely contained laughter. Emma was supposedly asleep in her bedroom, though Marcus knew she was actually conducting final equipment checks and reviewing her role for tomorrow's performance. Marcus stood in his study, staring out at the pool where underwater lights cast dancing patterns on the surface. In 7 hours, Owen Ward would be in position. In 8 hours, Derek McMahon would wake up for the last time. In 10 hours, the most elaborate revenge operation of Marcus's life would reach its climax. He opened his laptop and typed a final message to Calvin Bond. Phase 3 authorized. Initiate at 0800 hours. Calvin's response came immediately. Roger. All systems green. Financial assets secured. While Derek and Cheryl slept in ignorant bliss, Calvin was systematically emptying every account Derek had hidden under his various aliases. By morning, Derek McMahon would be financially dead even before he became physically dead. Marcus checked his watch, 12:47 a.m. In less than 18 hours, he would be a widower and Derek McMahon would be fish food. The thought should have disturbed him, but Marcus felt only the cold satisfaction of a mission approaching completion. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact labeled Cleanup Services, a euphemism for Bernard Starr, a former Army medic who now provided specialized services to people who needed problems to disappear completely. Bernard's teams could make a crime scene look like anything from an accident to a random burglary, depending on the client's needs. Marcus typed a simple message, tomorrow evening. Location as discussed. Full service required. Bernard's reply was equally concise. Confirmed. Standard rates apply. At 3 a.m., Marcus made his final preparation. He went to his bedroom closet and retrieved a small wooden box that had belonged to his grandfather, a World War II veteran who had understood the sometimes brutal requirements of protecting family. Inside the box was his grandfather's dog tags, a few faded photographs, and a letter written to Marcus's father shortly before the old man's death. Sometimes, the letter read, "A man must choose between being civilized and being effective. When someone threatens your family, choose effectiveness. The world has enough civilized dead heroes." Marcus refolded the letter and placed it back in the box. His grandfather would have approved of what was about to happen. At 6 a.m., Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Owen Ward. In position. Targets acquired. Awaiting your signal. Marcus replied, "Proceed as planned. No mercy." At 7 a.m., Derek and Cheryl emerged from the guest room, their faces glowing with post-coital satisfaction and anticipation of the day ahead. They joined Marcus and Emma for breakfast, chattering excitedly about their travel plans and the new life waiting for them in Costa Rica. "This is it," Derek said, raising his coffee mug in a final toast. "The beginning of everything." Marcus smiled and raised his own mug. "The end of everything," he replied quietly, his words lost in the clatter of plates and excited conversation. At 7:30 a.m., they loaded their luggage into Marcus's Range Rover for the drive to the airport. Derek sat in the front passenger seat, completely relaxed and unsuspecting. Cheryl and Emma sat in the back, Cheryl chattering about shopping in Costa Rica, while Emma provided appropriately enthusiastic responses. As they pulled out of the driveway, Marcus caught Owen's eye through the rearview mirror. His old friend was hidden in the landscaping across the street, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Owen nodded slightly. Everything was ready. Marcus turned onto the main road, driving toward what Derek and Cheryl believed was Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. In reality, they were driving toward Tim Owen's private airstrip, where a very different kind of flight plan was waiting. In the passenger seat, Derek hummed quietly to himself, utterly confident in his victory. In 20 minutes, he would discover that Marcus Bright was a far more dangerous enemy than he had ever imagined. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The private airstrip sat 30 miles outside Dallas, surrounded by scrub brush and heat shimmer that made the single runway look like a mirage. As Marcus pulled through the gates, Derek frowned at the modest facilities. "This isn't DFW," Derek said, his voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty Marcus had heard from him. "Private charter," Marcus explained smoothly. "More convenient, no security hassles. I use Tim's service for all my business travel." Derek relaxed, apparently satisfied with the explanation. Beside him, Cheryl was too busy taking selfies to pay attention to their surroundings. In the back seat, Emma sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap like a soldier awaiting orders. Tim Owen emerged from the small terminal building, his weathered face split by a genuine smile. "Marcus, ready for your Costa Rica adventure?" "More than ready," Marcus replied, shaking his old friend's hand. "Any changes to the flight plan?" "Actually, yes," Tim said, his tone casual but his eyes serious. "Got a call from air traffic control. We need to make a quick stop back at your place. Some paperwork issue with the international flight plan." Shouldn't take more than an hour. Derek's frown deepened. What kind of paperwork issue? Tim launched into a detailed explanation about customs documentation and international security protocols, his words carrying the authority of someone who had been flying for 30 years. It was complete fiction, but Derek had no expertise to contradict him. So we go back to the house, sort it out, then return here? Cheryl asked, clearly irritated by the delay. That's right, Marcus said. Sorry for the inconvenience, but better safe than sorry with international travel. 20 minutes later, they were pulling back into the Bright family driveway. The house looked exactly as they had left it, peaceful, suburban, normal. Derek couldn't have known that Owen Ward was already in position, that Calvin Bond was monitoring every electronic device on the property, or that Bernard Starr's cleanup crew was standing by 5 miles away. This is frustrating, Derek muttered as they entered through the front door. We're going to miss our connection in San Jose. Relax, Marcus said, his voice carrying the calm authority that had once commanded soldiers in combat. Why don't we take a quick swim while Tim sorts out the paperwork? The pool's heated, the sun's out. Might as well enjoy the delay. Derek's mood brightened at the suggestion. You know what? That's not a bad idea. When life gives you lemons. 20 minutes later, they were assembled by the pool. Derek wore his expensive swim trunks and the confident smile of a man who believed his luck was holding. Cheryl had changed into a bikini that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Emma sat on the edge, her feet in the water, playing her role perfectly. Marcus emerged from the pool house carrying drinks, cold beer for Derek, wine for Cheryl, iced tea for himself and Emma. He had been very careful about who got which drink. To making the best of unexpected delays, Marcus toasted, raising his glass. They drank, chatted about their travel plans, and enjoyed the afternoon sun. Derek was relaxed now, back in his element, regaling them with stories about previous Costa Rica trips and the contacts who would make their new life possible. I have to admit, Derek said, floating on his back in the deep end, this is nice. Maybe we should just stay here and forget about traveling. Funny you should mention that, Marcus said, his voice carrying a new edge that made Emma sit up straighter. I've been thinking the same thing. Derek treaded water, his expression shifting to mild confusion as the drugs in his beer began to take effect. What do you mean? I mean, Marcus said, standing up from his lounge chair, that I know exactly who you are, Derek McMahon. I know about your real name, your criminal record, your bank accounts in 3 different states. I know about the other families you've destroyed, the other husbands you've cuckolded and robbed. Derek's face went pale, but the sedative was slowing his reactions. He looked towards Cheryl for support, but she was staring at Marcus with dawning horror. Marcus, what are you talking about? Cheryl said, her voice shrill with growing panic. I'm talking about betrayal. Marcus replied, his voice deadly calm. I'm talking about my wife planning to divorce me after cleaning out my accounts. I'm talking about her boyfriend planning to murder me in Costa Rica and then groom my 16-year-old daughter. Emma stood up, her face showing none of the surprise or confusion that Derek and Cheryl might have expected. Instead, she looked at her stepmother with cold contempt. You thought you were so clever, Emma said, her young voice carrying an authority that belied her years. But you forgot one thing. I love my father more than I could ever fear you. Derek tried to swim toward the pool's edge, but the sedative had sapped his coordination. He floundered in the deep water, panic beginning to override the chemical fog in his brain. Marcus, Derek gasped. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Marcus interrupted. My wife's new boyfriend held my daughter underwater in our pool. Said I had 30 seconds to confess. I heard her struggling, gasping. Derek's eyes widened as he realized Marcus was reciting a script that Derek was about to be forced to perform. Confess to what? Marcus screamed, his voice carrying perfectly to the recording devices hidden around the pool area. Derek tried to speak, but the sedative had reached his vocal cords. He could only watch in growing horror as Marcus continued the performance. Fine, I'll tell you everything, Marcus shouted. That's when Derek felt strong hands grab his ankles, pulling him under the water. Owen Ward had entered the pool from the deep end, using scuba gear to approach unseen. Derek fought with drug desperation, but Owen was a professional killer who had trained for underwater combat. As Derek thrashed beneath the surface, Emma looked at her stepmother with steady eyes and said, "Good job, sweetheart." Then Marcus gave a barely perceptible signal, and a red laser appeared on Derek's forehead as Owen pulled him back to the surface. Derek gasped and choked, his eyes wild with terror as he realized the scope of the trap he had walked into. "Please," he managed to whisper, "I can explain." The explanation never came. Owen's blade found Derek's carotid artery with surgical precision, and Derek McMahon bled out in the same pool where he had planned to terrorize a 16-year-old girl. Cheryl screamed, but the sound died in her throat as she met Marcus's eyes. She saw something there that she had never seen before, the cold, implacable gaze of a man who had killed enemies of his country and would kill enemies of his family with equal efficiency. "Your turn, Cheryl," Marcus said quietly. "Time to discuss your future." Chapter 8, The Cleanup. Cheryl Kingbright had never seen a man die before, and Derek's death had been neither quick nor clean. She stood frozen by the pool's edge, her designer bikini soaked with splashed water and Derek's blood, watching Owen Ward efficiently secure the body with weights that would ensure it never surfaced. "Sit down, Cheryl," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same calm authority he had used with enemy prisoners. "We need to talk." Cheryl collapsed into a patio chair, her entire body shaking. "Marcus, please, I can explain. You can explain how you planned to divorce me after stealing my assets," Marcus asked conversationally. "Or how you shared my financial information with a career criminal. Or maybe you'd like to explain why you thought it was acceptable to put Emma in danger." Emma had moved to stand beside her father, her young face showing no distress at the violence she had just witnessed. If anything, she looked relieved, as if a terrible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I never meant for Emma to be hurt," Cheryl whispered, her voice barely audible. "But you were willing to let Derek groom her," Marcus replied. "You were willing to let him become her stepfather, knowing what kind of man he was. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." Owen emerged from the pool, his movements efficient and professional. Derek's body had disappeared beneath the surface, weighed down in the deep end where it would remain until Bernard Starr's team arrived for final disposal. "Target eliminated," Owen reported quietly. "No complications." Marcus nodded, then turned his attention back to his wife. "Here's what's going to happen, Cheryl. You have two choices, and I suggest you choose carefully." Cheryl looked up at him with desperate hope. "What choices?" "Choice 1. You disappear. Tonight. Forever. Calvin Bond has already prepared a new identity for you. Sarah Mitchell, unremarkable divorced woman from Phoenix. You get $50,000 and a bus ticket. You never contact me, Emma, or anyone from your old life again. You never remarry, never have children, never do anything that might bring attention to your new identity." "And choice 2?" Cheryl asked, though her voice suggested she didn't want to know. Marcus's smile was colder than winter in Afghanistan. "Choice 2 is you join Derek in the deep end of the pool." The silence stretched for long moments, broken only by the pool filter's gentle hum and the distant sound of traffic. Cheryl stared at her husband, this man she had shared a bed with for 7 years, but had never really known. "You're not joking," she whispered. "I never joke about protecting my family," Marcus replied. "Derek thought he could walk into my house, steal my life, and threaten my daughter. He discovered that some mistakes are permanent. The question is whether you want to learn the same lesson." Emma spoke for the first time since Derek's death, her voice carrying a maturity that reminded Marcus why he was so proud of her. "Cheryl, you have 5 minutes to decide. After that, Dad's going to assume you've chosen option 2. Cheryl looked at Emma with something approaching awe. "You planned this together. All of it. From the moment I caught you with Derek in Dad's bedroom," Emma confirmed. "You stopped being my mother that day. After that, you were just another threat to my family." The brutality of the statement, delivered in Emma's calm, matter-of-fact tone, seemed to break something inside Cheryl. She began to cry, not the manipulative tears Marcus had seen so often during their marriage, but the desperate sobs of someone who had finally understood the consequences of her actions. "I never wanted it to go this far," Cheryl managed between sobs. "Derek said it would be easy, that you would never find out, that we could just disappear and start over. With my money," Marcus pointed out, "after murdering me in Costa Rica." "I didn't know about that part," Cheryl insisted. He said you would just sign the divorce papers and move on." Owen Ward snorted derisively. "Lady, your boyfriend had a detailed plan for disposing of your husband's body in the Costa Rican jungle. We found it on his laptop along with research about local burial practices and wildlife patterns." The revelation hit Cheryl like a physical blow. He was going to kill Marcus anyway. "And eventually you too," Emma added helpfully. "Once he had control of the money and could find a younger replacement. We found communications with 3 other women he was grooming for future cons." Cheryl's sobs intensified, but Marcus felt no sympathy. She had made her choices with clear eyes and selfish intentions. The fact that Derek had planned to betray her too was simply justice. "Time's up," Marcus announced, checking his watch. "What's your decision, Cheryl?" Cheryl looked around the pool area, at Derek's blood still staining the concrete, at Owen Ward's professional indifference, at Emma's cold contempt, at Marcus's implacable resolve. She was surrounded by people who had already written her obituary and were simply waiting for her signature. "I'll disappear," she whispered. "Sarah Mitchell, Phoenix." "I understand." Marcus nodded to Calvin Bond, who emerged from the pool house, carrying a manila envelope and a small suitcase. "Your new documents are inside," Calvin said, his voice clinically professional. "Birth certificate, social security card, driver's license, credit history going back 5 years. Sarah Mitchell is a completely real person as far as any database is concerned." "The money?" Cheryl asked. "Cash," Calvin replied, indicating the suitcase. "Untraceable bills. Enough to establish yourself somewhere Derek's network can't find you, which is good because some of his former associates aren't going to be happy about his disappearance." The threat was clear. Cheryl wasn't just running from Marcus, but from Derek's criminal contacts who would assume she had been involved in his death. "You have 1 hour to pack essentials," Marcus told her. "Nothing valuable, nothing that can be traced. Calvin will drive you to the bus station, and then Sarah Mitchell begins her new life." Cheryl stood on shaking legs, looking around the home she had shared with Marcus for 7 years. "What about our marriage? The divorce?" "Cheryl King-Bright will simply vanish," Marcus explained. "No divorce necessary when there's no one to divorce. Eventually, I'll have you declared legally dead and move on with my life." As Cheryl stumbled toward the house to pack, Emma caught her arm. For a moment, Cheryl's face showed hope. Perhaps her stepdaughter would show mercy, would provide some comfort in this nightmare. Instead, Emma's voice was ice cold. "If you ever try to contact us, if you ever use your real name, if you ever do anything that brings trouble back to my father, I will personally hunt you down and finish what we started here tonight. Do you understand me?" Cheryl nodded mutely, finally understanding that the sweet 16-year-old girl she had dismissed as naive was actually her husband's daughter in every way that mattered. 45 minutes later, Calvin Bond's car disappeared down the driveway, carrying Sarah Mitchell toward her new life of permanent exile. Marcus and Emma stood by the pool, watching the taillights fade into the distance. "Do you think she'll try to come back?" Emma asked. Marcus shook his head. "Cheryl was always a coward. She'll convince herself that Sarah Mitchell is better than death, and eventually she'll start to believe it." Owen Ward began the final cleanup phase, draining the pool while Bernard Starr's team prepared to remove all traces of Derek McMahon's existence. By morning, there would be no evidence that Derek had ever been in the house, much less died there. "What now?" Emma asked as they walked back toward the house. Marcus put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, feeling the fierce pride that came from knowing she had stood with him against the world. "Now we go back to being a family. A real family, without lies or betrayal. Just us. Just us," Marcus confirmed. "And anyone who tries to threaten that family learns the same lesson Derek learned tonight." As they entered the house, Emma paused at the threshold. "Dad, I'm proud of you. For protecting us. For not letting them win." Marcus kissed the top of her head, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. You're the strongest person I know." Behind them, the pool sat empty and gleaming under the floodlights, all traces of violence scrubbed away by professionals who understood the price of crossing Marcus Bright. By dawn, it would be filled with fresh water and ready for normal family use. But Marcus and Emma would never swim in it again. Some victories came with a cost, and the pool would forever remind them of the night they chose family over forgiveness and survival over civilization. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Marcus Bright stood in the kitchen of their new home in Montana, watching Emma practice violin through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a pristine mountain lake. They had left Texas quietly, selling the Dallas house to a family who had no idea of its violent history. The pool had been filled with fresh concrete at Marcus's insistence. Some graves were better left permanently sealed. The Montana property was everything the Texas house had not been: isolated, defensible, and bought with cash under a corporate shell that Calvin Bond had established. Marcus Bright, the security consultant, had officially retired, his business sold to a competitor for a sum that allowed him to disappear into comfortable anonymity. "Morning, Dad," Emma called as she came inside, her cheeks flushed from the mountain air. At 17 now, she had grown into a young woman who carried herself with quiet confidence and spoke with the precision of someone who understood the weight of words. "Morning, sweetheart," Marcus replied, pouring her coffee in the mug that read "World's Best Daughter," a Father's Day gift that he treasured above his military commendations. "Sleep well." "Like the dead," Emma said, then paused at her choice of words. "Sorry, old habits." Marcus smiled. They had learned to be careful with their language in those first months after Dallas, when every casual phrase seemed loaded with double meaning. Time had eased the psychological aftershocks, but some changes were permanent. The morning brought their usual routine: breakfast together, review of the day's security protocols, and discussion of Emma's college preparations. She had been accepted to Montana State University with a full scholarship, her essay on overcoming family adversity having impressed the admissions committee without revealing any specifics they couldn't handle. Owen called last night. Marcus mentioned as they ate. "He's thinking about retiring to somewhere warm." "Good for him," Emma replied. "He's earned it." Owen Ward had remained in Texas long enough to ensure that Derek McMahon's disappearance was never investigated. The official story was that Derek had fled to avoid mounting debts, leaving behind creditors and at least 2 other women who claimed he had stolen their money. The authorities seemed satisfied that Derek was simply another con man who had moved on to greener pastures. "Any word from Calvin?" Emma asked. "Sarah Mitchell is working as a restaurant hostess in Tucson," Marcus reported, "living quietly, no contact with anyone from her past life. She's kept her word." They never spoke Cheryl's real name anymore, having collectively decided that Cheryl Kingbright had died that night in Dallas. Sarah Mitchell was someone else entirely, a stranger who shared their former wife and mother's face, but had no claim on their loyalty or concern. The doorbell chimed, an unusual sound in their isolated location. Marcus checked the security monitors and saw the FedEx truck parked in their circular driveway. The driver was genuine. Marcus recognized him from previous deliveries, but the sender was unexpected. The package was addressed to Emma, with a return address in Switzerland. Inside was a single manila envelope containing a letter and a bank routing slip. "It's from Jeremiah Jacobs," Emma said, reading the letterhead. "Cheryl's old divorce attorney." Marcus read over her shoulder as Emma unfolded the letter. "Dear Miss Adams-Bright, I am writing to inform you that my client, Cheryl Kingbright, has been declared legally dead after her disappearance 6 months ago. As she died intestate, her personal assets have been distributed according to state law. As her surviving stepchild, you are entitled to her personal effects and remaining financial accounts. The total sum of $127,000 has been deposited into the account specified below. Additionally, several items of jewelry and personal effects are being held at my office for your collection at your convenience. Please contact my office to arrange retrieval of these items. Sincerely, Jeremiah Jacobs, attorney at law." Emma looked at the bank routing slip, then at her father. Cheryl had her own money? Apparently more than we knew, Marcus replied, though he wasn't surprised. Cheryl had always been good at hiding things when it served her purposes. What should I do with it? Marcus considered the question carefully. The money was legitimately Emma's under the law, and keeping it would raise no suspicions. More importantly, it represented a final severing of ties with their old life. It's yours, he said finally. College fund, maybe, or save it for whatever comes next. Emma folded the letter and set it aside. What do you think she would have done with it? If things had gone differently, probably spent it on Derek, Marcus replied honestly, or whoever came after Derek. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning sun reflect off the lake. The water was clear and cold, nothing like the chlorinated pool where their old life had ended. Fish jumped occasionally, sending ripples across the perfect surface. Do you ever regret it? Emma asked quietly. What we did? Marcus considered the question seriously. In 6 months, Derek's disappearance had saved at least 3 other women from his cons, based on the communications Calvin had intercepted from Derek's network. Cheryl was living a quiet, harmless life instead of enabling another predator. Emma was safe, happy, and preparing for a future unburdened by the trauma Derek had planned to inflict. No, Marcus said finally. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret protecting our family. Even if it made us, what? Criminals? Marcus met her eyes steadily. Emma, there are laws written by politicians, and there are laws written by nature. Politicians say we should have called the police and hope for justice. Nature says we protect what matters most, regardless of the cost. Emma nodded, understanding flooding her young features. She had learned harsh lessons about the world's realities, but she had also learned that some people would always stand between her and harm. I love you, Dad, she said simply. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything. That afternoon, Marcus received a call on his secure phone. The number was blocked, but he recognized Calvin Bond's voice immediately. You might want to turn on the news, Calvin said without preamble. Channel 7, Dallas. Marcus found a remote and tuned to the specified channel. The afternoon news was running a story about a massive federal investigation into financial crimes involving luxury interior design firms. The reporter mentioned several arrests, including Derek McMahon's business partner, Adrian McMullen. Turns out Derek's network was bigger than we thought, Calvin explained. The FBI has been tracking them for 2 years. Derek's disappearance actually helped break the case. Without him, the others got sloppy. Marcus watched as the news showed perp walks and crime scene footage. Derek's mysterious disappearance was mentioned only briefly, as authorities focused on the criminals they could actually prosecute. Any chance this comes back to us? Marcus asked. 0, Calvin replied confidently. Derek McMahon is officially a fugitive who fled before the net closed. His death is cleaner this way. No one's looking for a body when they think he's hiding in South America. After the call ended, Marcus turned off the television and found Emma in her room, studying for her final high school exams. She looked up as he entered. Good news? She asked, reading his expression. The best kind, Marcus replied. The kind that closes books permanently. That evening, they cooked dinner together, pasta with Marcus's grandmother's marinara recipe, garlic bread, and a salad from their own garden. It was a simple meal, but it represented everything they had fought to preserve: family, tradition, and the peace to enjoy both without threat. As they cleaned up, Emma paused at the kitchen window. Dad, do you think we'll ever have to do anything like that again? Marcus joined her at the window, looking out at the lake where loons called across the darkening water. I hope not, sweetheart. But if we do, I know, Emma said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. We'll face it together. Marcus put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, feeling the fierce pride that came from knowing she understood what family really meant. They had paid a terrible price for that understanding, but some lessons could only be learned in blood and darkness. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions, a testament to the idea that some places remained beyond the reach of civilization's complications. Here, the only laws that mattered were the ones written in nature's brutal clarity, protect what you love, destroy what threatens it, and never apologize for doing what survival demands. As father and daughter stood together in the gathering darkness, they knew with absolute certainty that Marcus Bright and Emma Adams Bright would face whatever came next as they had faced everything else, together, uncompromising, and utterly without mercy for anyone foolish enough to threaten their family again. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed 8 times, marking another peaceful evening in their new life. But beneath the domestic tranquility lay the steel-hard truth that had carried them through their darkest hour. Some people were worth killing for, and some people were worth dying for, and the wisdom to know the difference was the most valuable inheritance a father could give his daughter. In the distance, a wolf howled across the lake, a sound both beautiful and terrifying, carrying the ancient promise that predators still roamed the world, and that the strongest among them would always protect their pack, no matter the cost. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Derek Morrison had built his life like a fortress, methodical, calculated, and seemingly impenetrable. At 38, he owned a successful construction company that specialized in luxury homes for Phoenix's elite. His calloused hands bore witness to years of labor before he'd transitioned to the business side, but those same hands could still frame a house or demolish one with equal precision. The Morrison household on Camelback Mountain was Derek's crown jewel, 6,000 square feet of glass and steel that he designed and built himself. Every beam, every fixture, every security camera had been personally selected. Crystal, his wife of 12 years, had initially been impressed by his attention to detail. Now she found it suffocating. Crystal Morrison had married Derek when she was 24 and he was 26, fresh out of college with dreams bigger than her trust fund could support. Derek's blue-collar determination had seemed romantic then, a rough-hewn prince who could build her castle. She'd been drawn to his quiet intensity, the way his gray eyes seemed to calculate everything twice before speaking. But 12 years of marriage had worn thin the novelty of Derek's methodical nature. Crystal craved spontaneity, excitement, the kind of thrill that her husband's predictable schedule couldn't provide. Her days were filled with yoga classes, lunch dates, and charity events, a life of comfortable emptiness that left her hungry for something more dangerous. That hunger had led her to Brett Hoffman 6 months ago. Brett was everything Derek wasn't. Impulsive, charming, reckless. A successful real estate agent who specialized in high-end properties, he moved through Phoenix's social circles with the kind of casual confidence that made women notice and men either envy or despise him. At 35, Brett had never been married, preferring to keep his options open and his commitments minimal. Their affair had begun at a charity auction where Brett was selling a penthouse and Crystal was bidding on art pieces for their home. He made a joke about her husband's absence, something about construction workers keeping regular hours, and she'd laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. "Your husband builds houses," Brett had said over champagne, "but does he build dreams?" It was a line he'd used before, but Crystal had been hungry enough to take the bait. Derek's best friend since high school, Miguel Santos, had noticed the changes first. Miguel owned a security consulting firm and had an eye for details that came from years of military service. He'd watched Crystal become more secretive with her phone, more critical of Derek's work schedule, more interested in appearing unavailable when Derek called during the day. "She's restless," Miguel had warned Derek over beers 3 months ago. Restless women do stupid things. Derek had dismissed the concern then. He trusted Crystal, trusted the life they'd built together. He provided for her, gave her freedom, respected her independence. What more could she want? But Miguel's words had planted a seed of awareness. Derek began noticing things. Crystal's new perfume, her sudden interest in fitness classes that ran late into the evening, the way she'd started calling him predictable with a tone that wasn't quite affectionate. Derek Morrison was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. When suspicion finally took root, he approached it the same way he approached everything else, with methodical precision. The investigation took 2 weeks. Derek installed tracking software on Crystal's phone during one of her yoga classes, positioned cameras in her car during a supposed girls' night out, and hired a private investigator to document what he already suspected. The evidence was comprehensive and devastating. Photos of Crystal and Brett at restaurants across the city, videos of them entering and leaving Brett's downtown condo, phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts. The private investigator, a retired police detective named Roy Vasquez, had even captured audio recordings of their conversations. "I feel like I'm finally alive again," Crystal's voice had said through Derek's speakers as he sat in his office late one evening, reviewing the evidence. "Derek's so routine, so predictable. He thinks providing for me is the same as loving me." Brett's response had been a laugh. "Guys like him, they think marriage is a business contract. All transactions, no passion. You deserve better than a glorified contractor." Derek had played that recording 17 times, memorizing every inflection, every casual cruelty. By the time he'd finished, the man who'd built a business on creating dreams for other families had decided to become a nightmare for the 2 people who destroyed his own. The plan began forming immediately. Derek Morrison had always been a builder, but he'd learned long ago that sometimes you had to tear down before you could create something better. Christmas was 6 weeks away. Chapter 2: The Architect of Ruin. Derek's transformation began subtly. To the outside world, he remained the same reliable, hard-working husband. He kissed Crystal goodbye each morning, asked about her day each evening, and maintained a facade of marital contentment with the skill of a master craftsman. But beneath the surface, Derek Morrison was designing the most important project of his life, the complete and total destruction of Crystal and Brett's world. The first step required understanding his targets completely. Derek had always believed that knowledge was the foundation of any successful build, and revenge required the same meticulous planning as constructing a skyscraper. Crystal, he learned through 12 years of marriage, was driven by image and social status. She needed to be admired, envied, seen as successful and desirable. Her greatest fear was embarrassment, being exposed as anything less than perfect. She'd rather suffer in silence than admit failure publicly. Brett Hoffman was more complex. Through careful research and a few strategic conversations with mutual acquaintances, Derek discovered that Brett's charm masked a dangerous game of financial juggling. He lived beyond his means, maintained his lifestyle through carefully managed debt, and had built his reputation on commission from sales that required constant hustle to maintain. More importantly, Brett had a weakness for married women specifically. Derek found evidence of at least 3 previous affairs, all with wives of successful men, all ending when the women chose their security over their passion. Brett seemed to enjoy the challenge of seducing women who had something to lose. Derek's plan required allies, and he began cultivating them with the same patience he'd once used to build his business from nothing. The first was Lindsay Palmer, Crystal's best friend and unwitting accomplice to the affair. Lindsay was a divorce attorney who thrived on drama and gossip, the kind of woman who collected secrets like trophies. She'd been covering for Crystal's affair, providing alibis and encouraging the relationship with the enthusiasm of someone who lived vicariously through other scandals. Derek approached Lindsay's involvement carefully. During a dinner party at their home, he'd mentioned his concerns about Crystal's distance, his worry that she might be unhappy. Lindsay had been quick to reassure him, perhaps too quick, and Derek had filed away her defensive responses for future use. The second ally was unexpected, Brett's own business partner, Amanda Cross. Derek had met Amanda at a property development meeting where Brett was notably absent, supposedly closing a major deal. Amanda was sharp, ambitious, and clearly frustrated with Brett's unreliable behavior. Brett's talented, Amanda had confided over coffee, but he treats this business like a game. He thinks charm can replace commitment. Derek had listened, asked thoughtful questions, and learned that Brett's recent success was largely due to Amanda's behind-the-scenes work. She was the one who researched properties, managed client relationships, and ensured contracts were properly executed. Brett was the face, but Amanda was the foundation. By November, Derek had assembled a comprehensive understanding of his target's vulnerabilities. Crystal needed social approval and financial security. Brett needed constant validation and income flow. Lindsay needed drama, but feared professional consequences. Amanda needed stability and recognition. Derek began constructing his revenge with the precision of an architect drafting blueprints. The first move came through Amanda. Derek approached her with a business proposition. His construction company needed a reliable real estate partner for a new development project, a luxury housing community that would be his company's largest undertaking. The commission potential was enormous, enough to transform Amanda's career. "I prefer to work with you directly," Derek had told her over lunch. "Brett seems distracted lately. I need partners I can rely on." Amanda had been immediately interested. The project was real. Derek had been planning the development for years, but now it served a dual purpose. Amanda's excitement about the opportunity meant she began questioning Brett's commitment to their partnership, especially as Derek carefully documented Brett's increasing absences and unreliability. The second move targeted Crystal's social circle. Derek began hosting business dinners at their home, inviting Phoenix's social elite. He played the role of devoted husband perfectly, praising Crystal publicly while privately documenting her discomfort with the domestic facade. "Derek's been so attentive lately," Crystal complained to Lindsay after one particularly successful dinner party. Derek's security cameras had captured the conversation. "It's like he's trying to prove something. It's suffocating." "Maybe he suspects something," Lindsay had suggested, and Derek had watched his wife's face change, fear flickering across her features before being replaced by defiance. "Let him suspect," Crystal had said. "I'm tired of living like a widow. Brett makes me feel alive." Derek had saved that recording in a special folder on his computer, labeled simply Evidence. By December, the foundation of Derek's plan was set. Amanda was ready to end her partnership with Brett, armed with documentation of his unreliability that Derek had helped her compile. Crystal's social circle was beginning to notice cracks in the Morrison marriage, though they attributed them to Derek's increased work demands rather than Crystal's infidelity. The final piece required the most delicate timing. Derek needed Crystal and Brett to feel confident, secure in their deception, ready to make the kind of mistake that would justify everything that followed. He found his opportunity in their Christmas plans. Crystal had suggested they host Christmas dinner for her family and close friends, an intimate gathering of 12 people, including Lindsay and, coincidentally, Brett, who would attend as Lindsay's date to maintain appearances. "It'll be perfect," Crystal had said, already planning how she and Brett could steal moments together during the celebration. "Just our closest friends and family." Derek had agreed enthusiastically, beginning preparations for what he privately called his masterpiece. Every detail was planned, every contingency considered. He'd spent 20 years building things that lasted, creating structures that could withstand storms and time. Now he would build something different, a moment of destruction so complete and carefully orchestrated that his targets would never recover from the impact. Christmas was 2 weeks away, and Derek Morrison was finally ready to give his wife and her lover the gift they truly deserved. Chapter 3. The Setup. The snow had been falling for 3 days, blanketing Phoenix in an unusual December storm that transformed the desert city into something almost magical. Derek watched from his office window as workers prepared the Morrison property for Christmas dinner, installing heated walkways and testing outdoor heaters to ensure his guests' comfort. Everything had to be perfect. Crystal was in her element, directing caterers and decorators with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed she was creating a memorable family gathering. She'd chosen an elegant winter theme, white and gold decorations throughout the house, with crystal centerpieces that caught the light like diamonds. "It's going to be beautiful," she'd told Derek that morning. her eyes bright with excitement. Everyone's going to remember this Christmas. Derek had smiled and agreed, though they were remembering it for very different reasons. The guest list had been carefully curated through subtle suggestions and strategic conversations. Crystal's parents, Robert and Helen Sterling, would anchor the family contingent. The Sterlings were old Phoenix money, conservative and traditional, the kind of people who valued reputation above all else. Crystal's younger sister, Brooke, would attend with her husband, a successful plastic surgeon named David Park. Brooke had always lived in Crystal's shadow, quietly resentful of her sister's seemingly perfect marriage and lifestyle. Lindsay Palmer would bring Brett as her date, a fiction that had become increasingly elaborate as the affair continued. To maintain appearances, Lindsay had been telling her other friends that she and Brett were casually dating, though anyone who observed them together could see the lack of genuine chemistry. Miguel Santos and his wife, Elena, rounded out the guest list. Miguel had been growing increasingly suspicious of Crystal's behavior, his military-trained instincts picking up on subtle changes in her demeanor and routine. The final guests were Amanda Cross and her husband, Tom, a financial advisor who Derek had recently hired to manage some of his business investments. Derek had invited them ostensibly to discuss the luxury development project, but their presence served a more important purpose in his plan. As Christmas Eve morning arrived, Derek made his final preparations. In his home office, secured behind a door that only he could access, Derek reviewed the evidence he'd compiled over the past months. Photos, recordings, financial documents, and security footage, enough material to destroy both Crystal and Brett in multiple ways. But Derek's plan wasn't simply about exposure. Public humiliation was just the beginning. The real gift lay in the wrap box he'd placed under the Christmas tree the night before, an elegant white package with gold ribbon that matched Crystal's decorating theme perfectly. Inside was a carefully prepared dossier that would serve as the foundation for everything that followed. Derek had learned from his years in construction that demolition required precision. You couldn't simply destroy. You had to control the collapse, ensure that the structure fell exactly where you wanted it to fall, that the debris landed on the right targets. The divorce papers that would be served during dinner were just the first explosive charge. The real demolition would begin when Crystal and Brett opened their Christmas present. As afternoon approached, Derek dressed carefully in a charcoal suit that Crystal had bought him the previous year. He wanted to look successful, composed, completely in control when everything began to unravel. The first guests arrived at 5 o'clock, Crystal's parents, dressed in formal attire and carrying expensive wine. Robert Sterling was a retired real estate developer who'd built his fortune in commercial properties during Phoenix's boom years. Helen was old money society, the kind of woman who'd rather die than be associated with scandal. "Derek, my boy," Robert said, shaking hands with the firm grip of a man who'd built an empire through personal relationships. "Crystal says you've been working too hard lately. You need to learn to delegate." "I've been learning that lesson recently," Derek replied, his tone carrying a meaning that Robert wouldn't understand until later. Brooke and David arrived next, followed by Miguel and Elena. Derek watched as his wife transformed into the perfect hostess, greeting everyone with warmth and enthusiasm while subtly checking her phone for messages for Brett. Lindsay and Brett arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that was clearly rehearsed. Brett wore an expensive suit and his most charming smile, playing the role of Lindsay's attentive date, while his eyes immediately sought Crystal. Brett Hoffman, he introduced himself to Robert Sterling, producing a business card with practiced ease. "I've heard wonderful things about your daughter's taste in homes. Derek's quite the architect." "Builder," Derek corrected quietly. "I build things. I tear them down when necessary, too." Amanda and Tom Cross arrived last, completing the dinner party. Derek watched as Brett's confident expression faltered slightly when he saw Amanda, clearly not expecting his business partner at what was supposed to be a social gathering. "Amanda," Brett said, his voice carrying forced enthusiasm. "I didn't know you and Derek were friends." "We've been working together on a new project," Derek replied smoothly. "I wanted to discuss some details with her husband about the financial structuring. Business and pleasure, you know how it is." As cocktails were served in the living room, Derek positioned himself where he could observe everyone's interactions. Crystal and Brett maintained perfect social distance, but Derek caught the subtle glances, the carefully timed movements that kept them in each other's proximity. Lindsay was nervous, her usual confidence replaced by fidgety energy as she overcompensated for the deception she was helping to maintain. She laughed too loudly at Brett's jokes and touched his arm with performances that fooled no one who was really paying attention. Miguel was watching everyone with the careful attention of someone who sensed danger but couldn't identify its source. Elena chatted with Crystal about holiday plans, unaware that this would be the last Christmas the Morrison family would spend together. At 7 o'clock, Derek called everyone to dinner. The dining room looked spectacular. Crystal's Winter Wonderland theme had created an atmosphere of elegant celebration. The long table gleamed with crystal and silver, candles casting warm light over the pristine white tablecloth. Derek took his place at the head of the table, Crystal at the opposite end. The seating arrangement had been carefully planned. Brett and Lindsay on one side, close enough to communicate with subtle glances, but not close enough for private conversation. Crystal's parents flanked Derek, their presence adding weight to everything that was about to unfold. As the first course was served, Derek raised his glass for a toast. To family, he said, his gray eyes moving deliberately around the table. To the people we trust with our most precious secrets, our deepest vulnerabilities. To the bonds that define us, and the choices that reveal who we truly are. Everyone raised their glasses, Crystal's hand trembling slightly as she met Derek's gaze. Brett smiled his charming smile, completely unaware that he was toasting his own destruction. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message, the signal he'd been waiting for. The process server was outside, ready to deliver the first of Christmas evening surprises. The demolition was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Serving of Papers. Derek excused himself from the table as the main course was being prepared, ostensibly to check on the caterers, but actually to coordinate the next phase of his plan. Through the kitchen window, he could see the process server waiting in an unmarked car, the divorce papers ready for delivery. The timing had to be perfect. Derek needed Crystal to feel secure, surrounded by family and friends, before the first blow landed. He needed Brett to be comfortable, confident in their deception, when everything began to unravel. Returning to the dining room, Derek found the conversation flowing smoothly. Robert Sterling was telling Brett about Phoenix's commercial real estate market, while Helen discussed charity work with Elena. Crystal was laughing at something David had said, her cheeks flushed with wine and what she believed was successful deception. "Dinner smells wonderful," Derek announced, retaking his seat. "Crystal, you've outdone yourself with the planning." "I wanted tonight to be special," Crystal replied, her eyes meeting his with what she probably thought was affection, but Derek recognized as guilt. The doorbell rang at exactly 8:15, cutting through the dinner conversation like a blade through silk. "I'll get it," Derek said, rising calmly. "Probably just a neighbor dropping off a Christmas card." He returned moments later with an official-looking man in a dark suit, carrying a leather portfolio. "Folks, I apologize for the interruption," Derek announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "This gentleman needs to deliver some documents that apparently couldn't wait until after the holidays." The process server stepped forward with professional efficiency. "Crystal Morrison?" Crystal's face went pale as she nodded, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. "You've been served," the man said simply, placing the divorce papers beside her plate before turning and walking back toward the door. The silence that followed was absolute. 12 people sat around an elegant table, the only sound the soft crackling of candles and the distant hum of Christmas music from the living room. Crystal stared at the papers as if they might disappear, her hands shaking as she reached for them. "Derek, what is this?" "Divorce papers," Derek replied calmly, cutting into his steak with deliberate precision. "I thought it was time we stopped pretending." "You can't be serious," Crystal stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Christmas. Our families are here. This is insane." Brett had gone rigid in his chair, his charming facade cracking as he realized the implications. Lindsay's face was flushed with embarrassment and fear, while the rest of the table sat in stunned silence. Derek continued eating, his movements unhurried and controlled. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I believe in honesty. Crystal, I thought it was time our marriage reflected our true feelings. Crystal's mother, Helen, found her voice first. Derek, surely this is some kind of misunderstanding. You two have seemed so happy. Have we? Derek interrupted, looking directly at his wife. Crystal, would you say we've been happy? Would you say our marriage has been fulfilling for you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Crystal's eyes darted around the table, seeking support, escape, anything but the truth that Derek was demanding. We should discuss this privately. Crystal managed, her social training warring with her panic. I think our families deserve to understand what's been happening, Derek said, his tone remaining conversational despite the devastating words. After all, they've invested so much in our marriage. Your parents especially, Crystal. They've been so proud of the life we've built together. Robert Sterling's face was darkening with each word, his businessman's instincts recognizing a calculated attack when he saw one. Derek, what exactly are you implying? Derek smiled, the expression as cold as the winter storm outside. I'm not implying anything, Robert. I'm stating facts. Crystal has been having an affair for the past 6 months. She's been lying to all of us, treating our marriage like a joke while pursuing her own interests. The explosion that followed was immediate and chaotic. Helen gasped as if she'd been physically struck. Brooke's eyes widened with shock that quickly transformed into something resembling satisfaction. Miguel leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone whose worst suspicions had been confirmed. But Derek's attention was focused on Brett, watching as the man's face cycled through surprise, fear, and desperate calculation. That's completely ridiculous, Brett said, his voice carrying forced indignation. Derek, I think you've been under too much stress. Maybe you should. Should what? Derek interrupted, turning his full attention to Brett for the first time. Should ignore the evidence? Should pretend I don't know about your afternoon visits to her yoga studio? Should forget about the restaurant receipts and hotel charges? Crystal was crying now, tears streaking her makeup as the carefully constructed facade of her life crumbled in real time. Derek, please. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. Won't it be better? Derek asked genuinely. When would be the appropriate time to acknowledge that you've been fucking Brett Hoffman for 6 months while playing the devoted wife at dinner parties? The crude language hit the formal dinner gathering like a physical blow. Helen Sterling actually recoiled, while Robert's face turned red with rage. Crystal, Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. Is this true? Crystal looked around the table desperately, seeking someone who might defend her, someone who might help her escape the trap that Derek had so carefully constructed. But there was nowhere to run, no words that could undo what had been said. It's complicated, she whispered. It's really not, Derek replied, signing the divorce papers with smooth strokes of his pen. I've already signed these. The division of assets is quite straightforward. You get nothing. You can't do that, Brett said, finally abandoning his pretense of innocence. Arizona is a community property state. She has rights. Does she? Derek's smile widened. That's interesting that you know so much about divorce law, Brett. Almost like you've done this before. Derek reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it on the table next to the divorce papers. I had some research done on your romantic history, Brett. Fascinating reading. It seems you have a pattern of pursuing married women, particularly wives of successful men. Amanda Cross, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly spoke up. Is that why you've been so distracted lately? Why you've missed 3 major client meetings this month? Brett's face went ashen as he realized the trap was closing from multiple directions. Amanda, this isn't what it looks like. Really? Derek interjected. Because it looks like you've been using your business partnership as cover to seduce my wife while neglecting your professional responsibilities. Amanda, I think you should know that Brett charged several of his dates with Crystal to your company credit card. Restaurant bills, hotel rooms, even jewelry purchases. Amanda's husband, Tom, leaned forward with the expression of someone who just realized he was watching a financial crime unfold. As a financial advisor, he understood immediately the implications of what Derek was suggesting. "Brett," Amanda said slowly, "please tell me you didn't use company funds for personal expenses." The silence that followed answered her question more effectively than words could have. Derek looked around the table, taking in the faces of everyone present. The shock, the disgust, the dawning realization that they were witnessing the complete destruction of two people's lives. "Now," Derek said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as designed. "Who wants dessert? Because I have a very special Christmas present to share with everyone." He gestured toward the elegantly wrapped box under the Christmas tree, and Crystal's eyes followed his movement with the expression of someone who was beginning to understand that her nightmare was just beginning. "My wife's best friend bet her I'd cry when they served me divorce papers at Christmas dinner," Derek continued, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Men are so predictable," she laughed. "Well, I signed immediately, then handed them a wrapped present." Derek's eyes moved to Lindsay, who had gone white with terror. "Lindsay, would you like to do the honors? After all, you helped make this Christmas so memorable." Chapter 5. The Present. The wrapped box sat under the Christmas tree like a time bomb, its elegant white paper and gold ribbon mocking the devastation that had already consumed the dinner party. Derek's invitation hung in the air as everyone stared at the innocent-looking package. Lindsay Palmer's face had gone from white to green, her attorney's instincts recognizing the careful setup of Derek's words. She'd made that bet with Crystal 3 weeks ago during one of their lunch meetings, laughing about how predictable men were when their pride was wounded. I don't think I should," Lindsay stammered, her hands shaking as she reached for her wine glass. "Nonsense," Derek said, rising from his chair with predatory grace. "You were so confident about men's predictability. Surely you're curious to see if your theory holds true." Crystal was still crying, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she clutched the divorce papers. "Derek, please. Whatever this is, whatever you think you're proving." "I'm not trying to prove anything," Derek interrupted, walking to the tree and retrieving the package. "I'm simply sharing the truth. All of it. With everyone who deserves to know." He placed the box in the center of the dining table, among the crystal glasses and elegant place settings that now seemed obscene in the context of the unfolding destruction. "Brett," Derek said, his tone conversational, "since you seem to enjoy unwrapping things that don't belong to you, why don't you do the honors?" Brett's hands were visibly shaking as he reached for the package. "Derek, whatever game you're playing." "Game?" Derek's laugh was cold and sharp. "This isn't a game, Brett. This is consequence. This is what happens when you mistake a man's kindness for weakness." The silence in the room was oppressive as Brett unwrapped the package with the careful movements of someone defusing a bomb. The white paper fell away to reveal an expensive wooden box, the kind used for important documents or family heirlooms. Inside, nestled in black velvet, were printed photographs, legal documents, and what appeared to be financial records. Brett lifted the first photograph, and his face went completely white. It was a picture of him and Crystal entering his downtown condo, taken through a telephoto lens with professional clarity. The timestamp showed it was from the previous Tuesday afternoon, when Crystal had told Derek she was shopping with her sister. "Keep going," Derek encouraged. "There's so much more." Brett's hand shook as he revealed the next layer. Bank records showing the company credit card charges Amanda had just learned about, restaurant receipts with intimate messages written on them, hotel bills from their afternoon encounters. But the photographs were the most damaging. Derek's private investigator had been thorough, capturing Crystal and Brett in compromising positions, intimate moments that destroyed any possibility of denying the affair's physical nature. "Oh my God," Helen Sterling whispered, covering her mouth as she saw her daughter's face in one of the images. Crystal lunged for the box, trying to grab the evidence, but Derek caught her wrist with gentle firmness. "Everyone needs to see Crystal. They deserve to understand what kind of people they've been defending." Robert Sterling's face was now purple with rage as he examined a photograph of his daughter kissing another man in a restaurant where Derek had taken her for their anniversary the previous year. Crystal, Robert's voice was barely controlled fury. How could you do this? How could you embarrass our family like this? It wasn't supposed to happen, Crystal sobbed. I never meant for it to go this far. Derek, you have to understand, I was lonely. You were always working, always focused on business. You needed excitement, Derek finished coldly. You needed passion. You needed someone who didn't treat marriage like a business contract. Isn't that right? Those were your words, recorded in Brett's condo 3 weeks ago. He reached into the box and withdrew a small digital recorder, pressing play. Crystal's voice filled the dining room, discussing her marriage with casual cruelty that made everyone at the table wince. Derek's so boring, her recorded voice said. He thinks providing for me is the same as loving me. He's like a machine. Wake up, work, come home, repeat. There's no spontaneity, no passion. Sometimes I feel like I married a robot. Brett's voice responded on the recording. Guys like him, they don't understand women like you. You need someone who appreciates your fire, your spirit. You deserve so much more than a glorified contractor. The words hit Derek's family and friends like physical blows. Miguel's wife, Elena, actually gasped. Brooke looked at her sister with unconcealed disgust. Even Lindsay appeared shocked by the casual cruelty of the recorded conversation. But Derek wasn't finished. The final layer of the box contained documents that transformed the situation from personal betrayal to potential criminal liability. Amanda, Derek said, addressing Brett's business partner directly. I think you'll find those financial records particularly interesting. It seems Brett has been creative with your company's expense accounts. Amanda studied the documents with growing horror. Credit card statements showed charges at expensive restaurants during times when Brett claimed to be working. Hotel bills for client meetings that lasted for hours. Jewelry purchases labeled as client appreciation gifts, but actually given to Crystal. Brett, Amanda's voice was deadly quiet. You've been embezzling from our partnership. It's not embezzlement, Brett protested weakly. Those are legitimate business expenses. Sometimes you have to entertain clients, build relationships, by fucking other men's wives. Miguel Santos spoke for the first time, his military background evident in his direct approach to the situation. Derek reached into his jacket and withdrew another envelope, this one sealed with his attorney's letterhead. Amanda, I think you'll want to pursue this criminally. My lawyer has prepared all the necessary documentation for the police and the state licensing board. Brett's face went from white to gray as he realized the full scope of Derek's preparation. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. This was about destroying him completely. The Real Estate Commission will be very interested in these financial irregularities, Derek continued. Professional licensing boards take ethics violations seriously, especially when they involve theft from business partners. Crystal was crying harder now, her social facade completely shattered. Derek, please. I'll end it. We can go to counseling. We can work this out. Please don't destroy everything over one mistake. One mistake. Derek's voice carried genuine surprise. Crystal, you've been lying to me for 6 months. You've humiliated me in front of our friends, discussed our private life with your lover, and treated our marriage vows like suggestions. Which part of that was a mistake? He gestured to the photographs scattered across the table. These weren't accidents. These are choices. Hundreds of choices to betray your family, your commitments, and your own integrity. Robert Sterling stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Helen, we're leaving. Now. Dad, please, Crystal begged. Don't do this. I'm still your daughter. Robert looked at her with the expression of someone seeing a stranger. My daughter wouldn't have done this. My daughter wouldn't have brought this shame on our family. As Crystal's parents gathered their coats, the rest of the dinner party began to dissolve. Brooke and David made their excuses, Brooke unable to hide her satisfaction at her sister's downfall. Miguel and Elena left quietly, Miguel squeezing Derek's shoulder in silent support. Amanda and Tom Cross remained, Amanda studying the financial documents with the focus of someone preparing for legal battle. Derek, I need copies of everything related to the company finances. I'm going to destroy him. Of course, Derek replied. My attorney has prepared complete packets for everyone who needs them. Brett's pattern of behavior extends beyond just my wife. Lindsay Palmer sat frozen in her chair, realizing that her role in facilitating the affair had been fully documented. As a divorce attorney, she understood that her professional reputation was about to be destroyed along with everything else. Derek, Lindsay said quietly, what do you want from me? Derek's smile was cold and final. Nothing, Lindsay. You've already given me everything I needed. Every lie you told, every alibi you provided, every time you helped them meet, it's all been documented. Your law firm will receive copies of everything tomorrow morning. As the last guest departed, Derek stood alone in his dining room, surrounded by the debris of his carefully orchestrated demolition. The elegant table setting looked like a crime scene, scattered with photographs and documents that had destroyed multiple lives in the span of an hour. Crystal remained in her chair, sobbing quietly, the divorce papers clutched in her hands. Brett had fled without saying goodbye, leaving his business partner and his lover to face the consequences alone. Derek poured himself a glass of wine and surveyed his work. The foundation of his old life had been completely demolished, but that had always been part of the plan. You couldn't build something new without first clearing the ground. And Derek Morrison was far from finished building. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The weeks following Christmas dinner unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction, each movement building on the last until the crescendo of Derek's revenge reached every corner of Crystal and Brett's lives. Brett Hoffman's world collapsed first with the mechanical precision Derek had engineered. Amanda Cross filed both civil and criminal charges within 48 hours of Christmas, armed with the comprehensive financial documentation Derek had provided. The Real Estate Licensing Board launched an immediate investigation, freezing Brett's assets pending resolution of the embezzlement charges. Local media picked up the story. Successful real estate agent accused of stealing from business partner to fund affair with married client. The scandal rippled through Phoenix's tight-knit real estate community like wildfire, destroying professional relationships Brett had spent years building. Derek watched from his office as Brett's downtown condo went into foreclosure, his luxury car was repossessed, and his country club membership was revoked. The man who had called Derek a glorified contractor was now facing felony charges and professional ruin. But Derek's true masterpiece was the systematic destruction of Crystal's social standing. The photographs from the Christmas present had begun circulating through Phoenix's social media networks within hours of the dinner party. Someone, Derek suspected Brooke, had shared them strategically, ensuring that Crystal's adultery became the subject of gossip at every charity luncheon, book club, and yoga class in their social circle. Crystal's attempt to maintain her lifestyle became increasingly desperate and pathetic. She tried attending her usual charity events, only to find herself frozen out by women who had once competed for her attention. Her gym membership was quietly terminated after other members complained about her presence. Even her favorite restaurants began finding reasons to cancel her reservations. The divorce proceedings moved forward with brutal efficiency. Derek's prenuptial agreement, which Crystal had signed without reading 12 years earlier, ensured that she received only what Arizona law required, essentially nothing from Derek's business or real estate holdings. Her parents cut off all financial support, horrified by the public humiliation she had brought on the Sterling family name. Robert Sterling issued a formal statement distancing the family from Crystal's actions, effectively disowning her in all but legal terms. Lindsay Palmer's legal career imploded with similar thoroughness. Derek's documentation of her role in facilitating the affair reached her law firm's ethics committee, resulting in a formal investigation that would likely end with her disbarment. Her divorce attorney practice evaporated as clients fled, unwilling to be associated with someone who had helped destroy a marriage. By February, Crystal was living in a studio apartment in Tempe, working as a receptionist at a dental office, the only job she could find with her limited skills and damaged reputation. Her social media accounts, once filled with pictures of luxury vacations and designer purchases, now sat largely empty. Derek observed her downfall with the satisfaction of an architect watching a successful demolition. Every aspect of Crystal's destruction had been precisely calculated, each consequence flowing naturally from the choices she and Brett had made. But Derek's revenge extended beyond mere financial and social ruin. The real genius of his plan lay in how he had turned Crystal and Brett's own actions against them, using their betrayal to expose deeper character flaws that made redemption impossible. Crystal's attempts to win back Derek's forgiveness became increasingly desperate and pathetic. She appeared at his office, at construction sites, even at his home, begging for another chance while displaying the exact selfishness that had driven her to adultery in the first place. "I made a mistake," she had sobbed during one particularly humiliating encounter outside Derek's office. "One mistake, Derek. Doesn't 12 years of marriage mean anything?" Derek had looked at her with a dispassionate assessment he might give a structural defect in a building. "Crystal, you made hundreds of choices to betray our marriage. The only mistake was thinking you were clever enough to get away with it." Her desperation revealed the shallow, entitled woman Derek had gradually realized he'd married. Crystal had never truly loved him. She had loved what he provided, the lifestyle he enabled, the social status his success had given her. Brett's destruction followed a different trajectory, but reached the same destination. Facing criminal charges and professional ruin, he attempted to salvage his situation by testifying against Crystal in the civil proceedings, claiming she had seduced him and manipulated him into the affair. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Derek's recordings revealed Brett's role as the pursuer, his calculated seduction of a married woman, his casual contempt for Derek and their marriage. The testimony only reinforced his image as a predator who targeted vulnerable women. Derek had manipulated the situation perfectly, ensuring that Brett and Crystal's attempts to save themselves only accelerated their mutual destruction. By spring, Derek began the next phase of his plan, rebuilding. The luxury housing development he had discussed with Amanda Cross moved forward rapidly. With Brett out of the picture, Amanda proved to be an exceptional business partner, bringing the kind of professional dedication that Derek valued above all else. Derek's construction company experienced unprecedented growth, partly due to his increased focus on work, but mostly because his reputation for ruthless efficiency had spread throughout Phoenix's business community. Other successful men, witnessing how Derek had handled his wife's betrayal, sought him out as a contractor they could trust. "You didn't just destroy them," Miguel observed during one of their weekly dinners. "You built something better from the wreckage." Derek smiled, raising his glass of wine. "That's what builders do, Miguel. We clear the ground of everything that's rotted and weak, then we construct something that will last." The Morrison house itself had been transformed. Derek removed every trace of Crystal's presence, redecorating with clean lines and masculine efficiency. The home that had once showcased Crystal's expensive taste now reflected Derek's practical nature and uncompromising standards. But Derek's revenge wasn't complete. The foundation had been laid, the structure demolished, but the final phase required patience and perfect timing. Crystal and Brett's destruction had been thorough but relatively quick. Derek's real masterpiece would unfold over years, ensuring that the consequences of their betrayal would follow them for the rest of their lives. He had planted seeds that would grow into permanent exile from the life they had once known, ensuring that neither of them would ever again find the security, respect, or love they had so carelessly thrown away. Derek Morrison was a patient man, and his revenge was just beginning to reach its full potential. Chapter 7. The Long Game. 2 years after the Christmas dinner that destroyed his marriage, Derek Morrison stood in the penthouse office of his expanded construction empire, looking out over the Phoenix skyline that increasingly bore his architectural signature. The city had become his canvas, and every luxury development, every commercial project, every prestigious contract served as both a symbol of his success and a tool of his continuing revenge. Derek's transformation from successful contractor to construction mogul hadn't been accidental. Every business decision, every partnership, Every strategic alliance had been calculated to ensure that Crystal and Brett would remain permanently exiled from the life they had once known. The luxury housing development with Amanda Cross had become Derek's launching pad into Phoenix's elite development circles. Amanda, driven by her own desire for revenge against Brett's betrayal, had proven to be a ruthless and effective partner. Together, they had cornered significant portions of the high-end real estate market, establishing a network of influence that extended throughout the city's social and business communities. Crystal's attempts to rebuild her life had been systematically thwarted by Derek's expanding influence. Every time she found a better job, Derek's connections ensured that her employer learned about her history. When she tried to move to better neighborhoods, property managers discovered reasons to reject her applications. Her attempts to return to her social circle were blocked by the wives of Derek's business partners, who viewed association with Crystal as professional and social suicide. But Derek's most elegant manipulation involved Brett's continuing destruction. The criminal charges for embezzlement had resulted in a plea bargain, 18 months in minimum security prison and 5 years probation. Brett's real estate license was permanently revoked, his professional reputation destroyed beyond repair. But Derek had ensured that Brett's punishment extended far beyond legal consequences. Through carefully managed business relationships, Derek had blacklisted Brett from virtually every legitimate employment opportunity in Arizona. Companies that considered hiring him received anonymous tips about his criminal history and tendency toward professional misconduct. Service businesses he might have started found their permits delayed, their insurance claims denied, their business licenses challenged. Brett had been forced to leave Phoenix entirely, relocating to Portland where he worked construction jobs under assumed names, always looking over his shoulder for the reach of Derek's influence. But Derek's patience had revealed an opportunity for a more sophisticated revenge. Brett's sister, Michelle, lived in Portland and had been helping him rebuild his life. She was a successful marketing executive, married to a software engineer, with 2 children and a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. Michelle had always disapproved of Brett's womanizing, but had stood by him during his legal troubles, believing that everyone deserved a second chance. Derek had spent 6 months researching Michelle's life, her husband's business, their social circle, their children's schools. He had discovered that Michelle's husband, Gary, was developing a mobile app that could revolutionize small business inventory management. The couple had invested their savings into the project and were seeking venture capital funding to launch the company. Derek's approach was masterful in its subtlety. Through a series of shell companies and business intermediaries, Derek arranged for Gary's app to receive preliminary funding from what appeared to be a Portland-based investment group. The terms were generous, enough money to quit his day job and focus full-time on development, with promises of larger funding rounds as the product reached market milestones. Gary and Michelle were ecstatic. After years of struggling to balance his software development with full-time employment, Gary could finally pursue his entrepreneurial dreams. They celebrated by upgrading their house, enrolling their children in private schools, and planning the family vacation they had postponed for years. The funding was real, but Derek controlled it through untraceable corporate structures. For 18 months, he allowed Gary's company to develop and launch the app, building hope and momentum while creating dependencies that would make the eventual collapse more devastating. During this time, Derek also orchestrated Brett's apparent recovery. Anonymous job opportunities appeared that allowed Brett to work in his preferred field again. His Portland apartment was upgraded through housing assistance programs that Derek secretly funded. Brett began to believe that his life was improving, that his sister's support and his own efforts were finally paying off. The trap was set with meticulous precision. In the 3rd quarter of Gary's 2nd year of development, Derek activated the final phase of his plan. The funding was suddenly withdrawn due to market conditions and strategic shifts in the investment group's priorities. Gary's company collapsed overnight, leaving him with enormous debts, failed obligations to employees, and professional reputation destroyed by his inability to deliver on promised contracts. Michelle and Gary lost their house, their children's private school tuition, and their life savings. Gary's mental health deteriorated under the pressure, leading to depression and alcohol abuse that further complicated their situation. But Derek's cruelest stroke was ensuring that Brett discovered the truth about who had orchestrated their destruction. An anonymous package arrived at Brett's apartment containing financial documents that traced the investment funding back to Derek's shell companies. The evidence was comprehensive and undeniable. Derek Morrison had deliberately built up Brett's sister's family just to destroy them more completely. Brett's call to Derek came at exactly the time Derek had predicted. "You destroyed my sister's life." Brett's voice was ragged with grief and rage. "Michelle and Gary never did anything to you. Their kids didn't deserve this." Derek's response was calm and measured. "Your sister chose to help you rebuild your life after you betrayed mine. Actions have consequences, Brett. Sometimes those consequences extend to the people who enable them." "They're innocent," Brett protested. "Whatever you think I deserve, they don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. Weren't Crystal and I innocent when you decided to pursue your affair?" Derek replied, "Didn't we deserve better than being betrayed by people we trusted? You made choices, Brett. Your sister made choices. Now you both live with the consequences." The conversation ended with Brett's sobbing plea for mercy that Derek ignored with the same cold efficiency he'd brought to every aspect of his revenge. But Derek's plan had one final, devastating component. Michelle's investigation into her family's financial collapse had led her to discover Brett's affair with Crystal, the criminal charges, and the complete truth about her brother's character. The stress of losing everything while learning that Brett had caused their destruction through his own moral failures created a rift in their relationship that could never be repaired. Michelle cut all contact with Brett, leaving him alone in Portland with nothing but the knowledge that his actions had destroyed not only his own life, but the lives of everyone who had tried to help him. Derek received confirmation of Brett's complete isolation through private investigator reports that arrived monthly like clockwork. Brett Hoffman, who had once charmed his way through Phoenix's social circles, now lived alone in a studio apartment, working day labor jobs and drinking himself toward an early grave. The symmetry was perfect. Brett had destroyed Derek's family, so Derek had ensured that Brett lost his family in return. The man who had taken everything Derek valued was now experiencing the same isolation and despair. Crystal's punishment followed a similar trajectory of escalating consequences that extended beyond her immediate circumstances to touch every aspect of her future. Derek had established a network of surveillance and sabotage that ensured Crystal could never rebuild the life she had thrown away. But his most devastating move involved her parents and sister, the family relationships that might have provided foundation for recovery. Chapter 8. Blood and Betrayal. Derek's manipulation of Crystal's family relationships required the delicate touch of a master strategist, but the foundations for their destruction had been laid years before the affair was discovered. Crystal's sister Brooke had always lived in her shadow, the less attractive, less successful, less charming sister who watched Crystal receive everything while working twice as hard for half the recognition. The affair and its explosive revelation had given Brooke an opportunity she had unconsciously been waiting for her entire life, the chance to finally be the good daughter. Derek had nurtured this dynamic with careful precision over the past 2 years. His construction company had been hired to renovate Brooke and David's medical practice, a project that brought Derek into regular contact with the couple. During these interactions, Derek had gradually revealed additional details about Crystal's betrayal, the depth of her lies, the casual cruelty of her recorded statements, the complete disregard she had shown for family loyalty. "She called your mother uptight and judgmental," Derek had mentioned during one construction meeting, showing Brooke transcripts of Crystal's conversations with Brett. "She said your father cared more about reputation than family, that she was tired of living up to sterling family expectations." Each revelation had driven the wedge deeper between Crystal and her sister, until Brooke's sympathy had transformed into active hostility. But Derek's masterstroke involved Robert Sterling's business legacy. Robert Sterling had built his real estate empire through traditional values: honesty, reliability, family reputation. The scandal of Crystal's affair had genuinely devastated him, not just personally, but professionally. In Phoenix's conservative business community, family scandals reflected on business integrity. Derek had positioned himself perfectly to exploit this vulnerability. His construction company's success had made him an attractive partner for Sterling's commercial development projects. What began as a professional relationship gradually became something approaching father-son mentorship, with Robert finding in Derek the principled, hard-working son-in-law he had thought he had but lost. "You remind me of myself at your age," Robert had told Derek during a business dinner 6 months earlier. "Focused, determined, unwilling to compromise your values for easy success." Derek had encouraged this relationship, while simultaneously ensuring that every interaction reminded Robert of Crystal's failures. Business meetings became opportunities to contrast Derek's integrity with Crystal's betrayal, his work ethic with her selfishness, his loyalty with her adultery. The psychological manipulation was devastating in its subtlety. Robert began to view Derek not just as a business partner, but as the son he wished he'd had, while Crystal became a source of shame and disappointment that he couldn't bear to acknowledge. When Crystal attempted to reconcile with her parents 18 months after the divorce, she found a wall of rejection that Derek had carefully constructed. Her father's business associates now included Derek as a key partner in multiple ventures. Accepting Crystal back into the family would mean acknowledging her presence at business functions, charity events, and social gatherings where Derek was increasingly prominent. Robert couldn't maintain both relationships without constant awkwardness and professional complications. Helen Sterling, always concerned with social appearances, found that her daughter's presence reminded everyone of the family's greatest scandal. Crystal's attempts to attend family gatherings created tension and embarrassment that eventually led to her being excluded entirely. Brooke's role in this exclusion was particularly cruel. As the remaining good daughter, she had gradually assumed Crystal's former position in family dynamics, becoming the child who received parental approval and support. Brooke's own children, Crystal's niece and nephew, were taught to view their aunt as a cautionary tale about moral failure. "Crystal made choices that hurt our family," Brooke explained to her children when they asked why Aunt Crystal never visited anymore. "Sometimes when people make bad choices, they have to live with the consequences." Derek observed this family destruction with the satisfaction of an architect whose building had performed exactly as designed under stress testing. But the psychological component of his revenge required deeper understanding of Crystal's character flaws, the weaknesses that had made her affair possible in the first place. Crystal had always defined herself through external validation: her appearance, her social status, her husband's success, her family's approval. Without these foundations, she had begun a spiral of self-destruction that Derek nurtured with surgical precision. Every time Crystal showed signs of genuine recovery, new job, new relationship, new attempt at self-improvement, Derek's network ensured that her progress was undermined. Not obviously, never in ways that could be traced back to him, but consistently enough to prevent any real stability from developing. The pattern created a cycle of hope and despair that gradually broke down Crystal's psychological resilience. She began to believe that she was fundamentally flawed, unworthy of happiness or success, destined to face consequences for the rest of her life. Derek's most psychologically devastating move involved the children Crystal had always planned to have. During their marriage, Crystal had postponed pregnancy multiple times, claiming she wasn't ready for the responsibility. Derek had agreed, respecting her desire to enjoy their early married years before starting a family. Now, at 37 and divorced, Crystal faced the reality that her fertile years were ending without the children she had assumed would always be available when she was ready. Her attempts to find a serious relationship had been consistently sabotaged by Derek's influence network, but more importantly by her own damaged reputation and psychological state. Men who might have considered her despite her history were deterred by her obvious instability and the social complications that came with dating Derek Morrison's notorious ex-wife. Crystal's growing desperation led to increasingly poor choices in relationships. Men who used her, men who had no interest in commitment, men who reminded her constantly of her diminished status and limited options. Derek received monthly reports on Crystal's deteriorating situation through the private investigators he maintained. The woman who had once commanded attention at charity galas now worked multiple part-time jobs to afford her studio apartment. The woman who had called Derek predictable now lived in chaos, her life a series of crises and failed attempts at stability. But Derek's revenge had one final component that would ensure its permanence. Crystal's complete social exile had been engineered to serve a larger purpose. Derek wanted her isolation to be so complete, her circumstances so desperate, that any future attempt at happiness would seem impossible not just to others, but to Crystal herself. The psychological pressure was designed to break her will, to continue trying, to make her accept that her life would never recover from the choices she had made during those 6 months of adultery. Derek's plan was working perfectly. Crystal had begun showing signs of clinical depression, her already limited social skills deteriorating under the constant stress of financial insecurity and social rejection. Her attempts to contact Derek had become increasingly pathetic. Letters begging for forgiveness, phone calls pleading for a chance to explain, even showing up at his office with proposals for reconciliation that demonstrated how completely she had lost touch with reality. Derek saved every letter, recorded every phone call, documented every desperate attempt at contact, not as evidence for legal purposes, but as trophies of his successful campaign to reduce the woman who had betrayed him to complete psychological submission. The final phase of Derek's revenge was approaching, the moment when Crystal would face the ultimate consequence of her choices, the realization that her suffering would never end, that no redemption was possible, that Derek Morrison's revenge was as permanent and unforgiving as the buildings he constructed. Chapter 9. The Final Foundation. 5 years after the Christmas dinner that destroyed his marriage, Derek Morrison stood in the penthouse of his newly completed headquarters building, the tallest structure in downtown Phoenix, bearing his name in steel letters that caught the desert sunlight like a monument to his success. The Morrison Tower wasn't just a symbol of his business empire. It was the final piece of his revenge, a permanent reminder to everyone who had betrayed him that Derek Morrison's memory was as enduring as the concrete and steel he used to build his legacy. From his corner office on the 40th floor, Derek could see the entire city he had conquered through strategic brilliance and ruthless determination. His construction company now employed over 300 people. His real estate partnerships controlled significant portions of Phoenix's luxury development market, and his political connections ensured that his influence extended into every corner of the city's power structure. But Derek's true masterpiece wasn't visible from his office window. It was the complete and systematic destruction of everyone who had betrayed him, a process that had reached its perfect conclusion with devastating finality. Crystal Morrison, she had never legally changed her name back to Sterling, no longer existed in any meaningful sense. The woman who had once graced charity galas and commanded social attention had been reduced to a ghost haunting the margins of Phoenix society. Her final attempt at rebuilding had come 18 months earlier, when she'd found work as a receptionist at a small law firm that specialized in immigration cases. For 6 months, Crystal had maintained stable employment, begun therapy, and even started dating a paralegal named Marcus who seemed genuinely interested in her despite her history. Derek had allowed this recovery to develop, watching through his network of informants as Crystal began to hope that she might finally escape the consequences of her affair. She'd moved to a better apartment, bought new clothes, started talking about the possibility of a future with Marcus. The destruction Derek engineered was surgical in its precision. Marcus discovered Crystal's history not through Derek's direct intervention, but through a carefully orchestrated series of coincidences that led him to research the woman he was considering marrying. Social media posts that had been strategically preserved, legal documents that were mysteriously accessible, testimony from the criminal case that painted Crystal as a manipulative adulteress who had seduced Brett Hoffman into embezzling funds to support their affair. But Derek's cruelest stroke was the revelation that Crystal had lied to Marcus about her ability to have children. Medical records, legally obtained through Derek's connections in the healthcare community, showed that Crystal had undergone a tubal ligation procedure during her marriage to Derek, a fact she had concealed while allowing Marcus to plan a future that included the family he desperately wanted. Marcus's rejection wasn't just romantic, it was moral. He left Crystal with a kind of disgust and betrayal that echoed Derek's own experience, complete with recorded conversations that demonstrated Crystal's ongoing capacity for deception and manipulation. The parallel was intentional. Derek wanted Crystal to experience the same shock of discovery, the same sense of intimate betrayal, the same realization that someone she trusted had been systematically lying to her. Crystal's response to this final rejection had been complete psychological collapse. She'd lost the law firm job when her emotional instability made her unable to function professionally. The therapy sessions had ended when she could no longer afford them. The better apartment had been abandoned when she could no longer pay rent. Derek's investigators reported that Crystal now lived in a halfway house for women in crisis, working part-time at a grocery store and showing signs of severe depression that bordered on catatonia. She had gained 60 pounds, stopped caring for her appearance, and ceased all attempts at social interaction. The woman who had once mocked Derek's predictability now existed in a state of complete surrender to circumstances she could neither understand nor control. But Derek's revenge had extended beyond Crystal's personal destruction to ensure that her suffering served as a permanent warning to others who might consider betraying him. The story of Crystal Morrison's downfall had become legend in Phoenix's social circles, a cautionary tale that wives whispered to each other about the consequences of adultery. Derek had become a figure of both respect and fear, a man whose loyalty was absolute, but whose revenge was comprehensive and unforgiving. Brett Hoffman's destruction had reached an even more complete conclusion. The systematic sabotage of his sister's family had created a cascade of consequences that destroyed every relationship Brett had ever valued. Michelle's marriage to Gary had ended in divorce after Gary's alcoholism and depression made him unable to function as a husband or father. Their children had been placed in Michelle's custody, but the financial devastation had forced her to move in with her elderly parents while working 2 jobs to support her family. Michelle's research into the source of their destruction had led her to uncover not just Derek's involvement, but the complete truth about Brett's character and the pattern of selfish choices that had created their situation. Her final conversation with her brother had been recorded by Derek's surveillance team and provided regular entertainment during Derek's evening reviews of his revenge's ongoing success. "You destroyed my children's lives," Michelle had screamed at Brett through tears of rage and grief. "My daughter asked me why we lost our house, why Daddy drinks all the time, why we can't afford the things we used to have. What am I supposed to tell her? That her uncle is a lying, cheating, stealing piece of shit who ruins everything he touches." Brett's response had been equally devastating. The weak protestations of a man who finally understood that his actions had consequences extending far beyond his own life, but who remained fundamentally unable to accept responsibility for the choice he had made. Derek had ensured that Brett's isolation was complete. The man who had once charmed his way through Phoenix's social scene now lived alone in a studio apartment in Portland's worst neighborhood, working day labor jobs and drinking away his wages while slowly dying from liver disease that he couldn't afford to treat. The private investigator reports showed that Brett had made several suicide attempts, each time pulling back at the last moment, not from hope but from cowardice. He lacked even the courage to end his own suffering, trapped in a life that held no possibility of improvement or redemption. Derek reviewed these reports with the satisfaction of an architect conducting final inspections on a perfectly executed project. But the crowning achievement of Derek's revenge was the complete reconstruction of his own life into something that stood as a permanent monument to the principles Brett and Crystal had violated. The Morrison Tower wasn't just Derek's headquarters. It was a symbol of what could be built through loyalty, integrity, and uncompromising standards. Every floor housed businesses owned by Derek's allies, men and women who had proven their trustworthiness through years of professional partnership. Derek's penthouse apartment occupied the top floor, a space designed with clean lines and masculine efficiency that reflected his character with perfect honesty. No compromises, no accommodations for anyone else's preferences, no reminders of the failed attempt at partnership that had once defined his life. His social circle consisted entirely of people who shared his values. Successful individuals who understood that loyalty was the foundation of all meaningful relationships, that betrayal was unforgivable, and that consequences were permanent. Derek had married again, though the ceremony was a private affair that reflected his new understanding of commitment. Sarah Chun was a successful architect who brought her own resources and reputation to their partnership. More importantly, she understood and respected the principles that governed Derek's life. "I know what happened to your first wife," Sarah had told him during their courtship. "I know what you're capable of when someone betrays you. That's not a weakness, it's integrity. I want to build something with a man who understands that promises matter." Their marriage was everything Derek's first marriage had pretended to be, a genuine partnership between equals who respected each other's strength and independence while building something together that neither could achieve alone. As Derek stood in his office, reviewing the monthly reports on Crystal and Brett's continuing decline, he reflected on the perfect